One day, in the store, the woman walked toward the back area and stumbled upon a horrifying scene. The body of a woman lying in a pool of blood. She was shaken to her core. What intensified her terror was the realization that she had seen this woman alive in the store only hours earlier. Fighting the urge to scream, she slowly backed away from the body, only to bump into someone behind her. Ginger Rios was born in Las Vegas, Nevada, to Denise and George Rios. She grew up alongside her sister, Daniela, in a close-knit family. From a young age, Ginger was vibrant, energetic, full of ambition. She loved music, dancing, and singing, often spoke of performing on stage one day. As a child, she once promised her mother that if she pursued the arts, she would someday become Miss Las Vegas. Ginger thrived in social settings, lighting up every room she entered. Her intelligence, warmth, and charisma made her unforgettable to those who knew her. As she grew older, Ginger pursued her passion professionally, working as a backup dancer in a show called The Salsa Machine. When she was 20 years old, she met Mark Hollinger, who was 34 at the time. Despite the age difference, Ginger was confident and mature beyond her years. Her parents initially had concerns but ultimately approved of Mark after seeing how happy and secure Ginger was with him. Their bond formed quickly and deeply. Eventually, they got married and moved in together, determined to build a stable future, especially with thoughts of eventually starting a family. Ginger decided to look for a book that could help them improve their credit. This was 1997, long before financial advice was readily available online. On April 4, 1997, Ginger and Mark were driving along Maryland Parkway in Las Vegas when they noticed the familiar storefront of Spycraft. The store stood out immediately, its windows filled with cameras and unusual equipment. Spycraft was part of a chain with multiple locations across the western United States and was known for selling surveillance devices, tracking tools, and books on specialized topics. Mark stayed in the car while Ginger went inside. She planned only a quick stop to browse. She took nothing with her except her wallet, leaving the rest of her belongings in the vehicle. Spycraft attracted all kinds of customers. Some were simply curious or concerned parents, but others had more questionable motives, looking for devices that could be used without drawing attention. At the time, the store was operated by Craig Leslie Jacobson and his wife. Minutes passed, then more time. Ginger didn't return. Mark waited in the parking lot, watching the entrance carefully. If Ginger had stepped outside, he would have seen her, but she never emerged from the front door. Anxiety began to creep into him. Ginger's delay was completely out of character, especially since they still had errands to run. Finally, Mark got out of the car, entered the store. He went straight to the counter and asked about Ginger, wanting to know whether she was still inside. The response stunned him. Jacobson told Mark that Ginger had already made a purchase and left the store some time earlier. Mark knew immediately that this wasn't true. Alarmed, Mark began searching the store aisle by aisle, calling her name. Ginger was nowhere to be found. Clearly, something bad has happened. Mark returned to the store owners, pleading with them to help locate his wife. Jacobson repeated the same story, insisting that Ginger had made a purchase and already left the store. This response only deepened Mark's confusion and growing sense of dread. With no other options, he left the shop and called his in-laws, reaching George Rios, Ginger's father, to tell him that she was missing. George initially suggested that Ginger might have stepped into a nearby store and that Mark may simply have missed her leaving. At first, George was not overly alarmed. But as the hours passed and there was still no sign of Ginger, concern quickly turned into fear. This behavior was completely out of character for her. She would never disappear without saying anything. Adding to the worry, Ginger's bag was still in the car with Mark. and the only thing she had taken with her was her wallet, which contained very little cash. It became increasingly clear that she had not left voluntarily. Both George and Mark realized they needed to report Ginger missing. Sensing that something serious had happened that evening, George and Mark returned to the Spycraft store, hoping to review the surveillance footage to track Ginger's movements. When they arrived, the shop was closed. Craig Jacobson and his wife were outside near a van. Mark and George approached them, asked to see the security footage. Jacobson said he were busy at the moment and told them to come back over the weekend if they wanted to view it. There was nothing more they could do that night. Though Mark and George went their separate ways, Ginger's disappearance hung over them like a dark cloud. By the following Monday, she was officially reported missing to the police. Detectives immediately noted how unusual the situation was. At first, they considered whether Ginger might have run away, but a review of her bank accounts quickly ruled that out. Her money remained untouched, exactly as it had been on the day she vanished. Ginger also carried very little cash, making it unlikely she could have gone anywhere intentionally. With that possibility eliminated, investigators began assembling a list of potential suspects. As is standard procedure, Mark Hollinger was among the first people scrutinized. What puzzled the investigators was Mark's reaction when Ginger went missing. Instead of contacting the police immediately, he had called her father first. From a law enforcement perspective, this hesitation seemed suspicious. Then, just days after Ginger's disappearance, something even more unusual occurred. Mark's car caught fire and was completely destroyed. Police viewed the incident with deep suspicion, believing the fire was unlikely to have been accidental. Investigators began to suspect that the vehicle may have been deliberately set ablaze to destroy potential evidence. Eventually, police conducted a thorough investigation into Mark. Throughout questioning, he remained firm, insisting he had nothing to do with Ginger's disappearance and claiming he was just as desperate to find her as everyone else. As for the fire, Mark explained that the car had overheated while he was driving home and suddenly burst into flames. He said he barely managed to escape as the fire spread rapidly. By the time he tried to react, the flames were out of control. At the time, cell phones were not widely used, and finding a payphone was not always easy. The burned-out car was seized and carefully examined for any evidence that might shed light on Ginger's disappearance. With no evidence tying him to a crime, Mark was ultimately released. As days passed without any sign of Ginger, investigators faced a difficult truth. Something had definitely happened to her. Police shifted their focus to Spycraft, the store where Ginger Rios had last been seen alive. Investigators wanted to review the store's surveillance footage, but quickly ran into obstacles. Craig Leslie Jacobson, the store's owner, was reportedly in Phoenix, Arizona, overseeing another location. Without him present, officers were unable to access any video recordings. Even so, they decided to examine the premises themselves. When officers entered the bathroom at the back of the store, they were immediately struck by a strong odor of bleach. On the wall, they noticed a single, tiny red stain. Though small, it appeared suspicious. When questioned, Jacobson quickly offered an explanation. He claimed that his dog had made a mess in the bathroom and that he had used bleach to eliminate the odor. He further insisted that the stain on the wall was also caused by the dog. In 1997, DNA technology was limited, and such a small trace was difficult to analyze with certainty. When asked again about Ginger, Jacobson repeated the same story he had told Mark. But when officers asked him to produce either the video or the receipt, he was unable to do so. Whether this was due to deception or poor record-keeping, it raised serious red flags. Investigators sensed that something was wrong, but without concrete evidence, they couldn't do anything. With no progress at the store, police turned their attention to Ginger's work as a performer. They explored the possibility that she might have been stalked or targeted by someone unstable. Despite following multiple leads, this line of inquiry led nowhere. By then, nearly a month had passed since Ginger vanished, and the investigation was at a standstill. There were no solid leads, no reliable witnesses, no answers. A few months later, a woman came forward to provide information. Her testimony would finally provide clarity about what had happened. The woman's name was Cheryl. She was Craig Leslie Jacobson's wife at the time. Cheryl revealed critical details that investigators had never heard before. When asked why she had remained silent for so long, she said she feared what he might do if she spoke up, especially because she was the one who had found Ginger. Cheryl believed that speaking out could put both her and her infant child in grave danger. According to Cheryl, from the moment Ginger entered the store, Craig's attention became disturbingly fixated on her. She described his stare as intense and unsettling, as though he couldn't take his eyes off Ginger. Shortly after Ginger arrived, Craig ordered Cheryl to retrieve something from the back of the store, something he frequently did, often barking commands without explanation. Cheryl went to the back as instructed. When she returned a few minutes later, Ginger was gone. At first, Cheryl assumed Ginger had simply made her purchase and left. Around that same time, Mark entered the store, visibly worried, asking where his wife was. Cheryl genuinely didn't know what to tell him. After Mark left, however, Jacobson warned her not to go into the storage area at the back of the store. Despite her fear, Cheryl decided to go back anyway. When she opened the door, she nearly screamed. Ginger was lying on the floor, motionless. As Cheryl staggered backward in shock, she ran directly into Jacobson. An encounter straight out of a nightmare. He stepped close to her and threatened her, warning that if she ever told anyone what she had seen, both she and her baby would suffer the consequences. Cheryl later told investigators that Jacobson confessed to her what he had done while she was away. According to her account, he had grabbed Ginger from behind and attacked her, killing her inside the store. He offered no explanation, no justification. The horror of Ginger's final moments was almost impossible to comprehend. A young woman, alone in a store, brutally attacked, killed by a man she had never met, while help was just feet away, and no one knew. Cheryl recalled that, to conceal the crime, Craig Jacobson, along with another employee, thoroughly cleaned the back room of the Spycraft store using large amounts of bleach. Afterward, Jacobson placed Ginger's body into a van, the very same van beside which he and Cheryl had been standing when Mark and George came searching for Ginger. That night, Ginger's husband and father had unknowingly stood just feet away from her lifeless body. Even more devastating was the fact that Cheryl knew exactly where Ginger was at that moment. But fear kept her silent in her husband's presence. Cheryl told police that about a month later, she, Jacobson, and their infant child traveled to Arizona desert, where Jacobson buried Ginger's body in a remote desert area inside a wooden box. Authorities eventually discovered a body in the desert, but at the time, it could not be positively identified as Ginger. When Jacobson learned that remains had been found, he immediately fled. It was ultimately Cheryl who led investigators to the precise location where Ginger's body had been concealed. The remains were found buried beneath sand and concrete. Later, forensic testing confirmed that the body belonged to 20-year-old Ginger Rios. Following this discovery, police obtained a search warrant for the Spycraft store. Inside, investigators found traces of Ginger's DNA in the back room. An even more disturbing revelation soon followed. Craig Leslie Jacobson was a fugitive with an extensive criminal history. Years earlier, Jacobson had fled under an alias to avoid prosecution for burglary and theft. After serving time, he changed his name again, married Cheryl, and continued operating Spycraft stores across several western states, including a location in a Las Vegas strip mall. It remains unclear whether Cheryl was aware of the full extent of his criminal past. Investigators also uncovered troubling patterns. Reports indicated that Jacobson often fixated on women with dark hair. One young man later claimed that Jacobson had paid him to photograph such women. In August 1997, Jacobson was arrested in Los Angeles following a confrontation with a police officer. Though details of that incident were limited, he was quickly extradited back to Nevada and formally charged with Ginger's murder. During legal proceedings, Jacobson ultimately confessed to killing Ginger, claiming that he suffered from schizophrenia and displaying erratic behavior. Prosecutors, however, argued that he was not mentally ill and was deliberately feigning symptoms in an attempt to secure a lighter sentence. Reports from within the prison system suggested that Jacobson had openly discussed plans to pretend insanity in order to manipulate the courts. Although prosecutors initially considered seeking the death penalty, they eventually offered Jacobson a plea agreement, which he accepted. Under the terms of the deal, Jacobson was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 20 years and ordered to pay approximately $3,200 in restitution to Ginger's family. There was, however, another chilling discovery. Another set of remains was found in the desert near Ginger's burial place. Years later, authorities identified her as Cristina Marie Martinez, a teenager believed to have also been killed by Jacobson. Cristina was 15 years old when she disappeared in May 1987, after visiting a nearby laundromat. She lived in a group home in Arizona, located across the street from a branch of the Spycraft store. Tragically, no immediate large-scale search was launched for Cristina, likely due to her troubled background and prior encounters with law enforcement. She went missing for many years before her body was found in the desert. In 2015, after completing his sentence in Nevada, Jacobson was extradited to Arizona to face charges related to Cristina's murder. In 2016, a judge in Maricopa County Superior Court initially ruled Craig Jacobson mentally incompetent to stand trial. That decision was later reversed, with the court concluding that he had been exaggerating or feigning mental illness. On September 21, 2017, judge approved a defense request for an additional competency evaluation. Since then, there have been no significant public updates in the case. Craig Leslie Jacobson remains incarcerated. Investigators have long suspected that Ginger Rios and Cristina Marie Martinez may not have been his only victims. In May 1997, he was also suspected in the disappearance and possible murder of another young woman, Mary Stoddard, whose body has never been recovered. The death of Ginger left a deep and permanent scar on her family, who continued to carry the weight of their grief long after the case was closed. At one point, Craig Jacobson even wrote letters to Ginger's father, expressing remorse for the pain he had caused. In those letters, he claimed he attacked Ginger because she had supposedly snapped at him inside the store that day. But nothing in his explanation could justify murder. Tragically, Ginger's mother, Denise Rios, passed away from cancer on July 24, 2014, carrying with her the unbearable pain of losing her daughter years earlier. Her passing left Ginger's father, George Rios, and her sister, Daniela, to navigate their grief alone. The only comfort they found was believing that Ginger and Denise were together again in a place free from suffering. Ginger had been looking forward to her future. She dreamed of owning a home with her husband, raising children, and watching her family grow. She hoped to perform on stage, to dance, to sing, and to build the creative life she had always imagined. But she never had the chance to reach those dreams. Her life was stolen at just 20 years old, long before she could see any of it unfold. That night in Thousand Oaks began like any other. Quiet, without a hint of anything unusual. But just hours later, a young man would die in his own apartment, stabbed 108 times by the woman he trusted completely. This isn't just a story about a seemingly harmless date or a simple marijuana try. It's a series of small, unconscious choices leading to an irreversible tragedy. where the line between victim and perpetrator blurs hauntingly. So what exactly happened behind those apartment doors? Was it a marijuana-induced psychosis? A silent, coerced act? Or a tragedy the legal system was never prepared to confront? The answer will force us to reconsider the hardest questions about justice, about accountability, and about the true cost of a seemingly harmless decision. Chad O'Melia was born on September 27, 1991, in Santa Clarita, a city north of Los Angeles, California. His father, Sean O'Melia, was an Irish construction supervisor. His mother, Michelle, separated from his father when he was 5 years old. Despite the separation, his parents showed him great love and tried to provide him with a stable family. Chad is known for being intelligent, responsible, and loyal. To his friends, he was the dependable big brother, always ready to help or offer advice without expecting anything in return. From a young age, Chad developed a love for American football, a passion he kept throughout his teenage years. While attending Chico State University, Chad continued playing American football while studying accounting, and later graduated. After graduating, he moved to Thousand Oaks, Los Angeles, with his dog, Athena. He shared the apartment with a roommate, Vinny Oliveira, while working at an accounting firm. He was working toward becoming a certified public accountant (CPA), which left him with little time for rest. To cope with his sleepless nights, he began using cannabis to help him relax and fall asleep. According to Vinny, Chad often showed signs of being high when he was at home. His cannabis use wasn't a secret. His friends and parents both knew. Although his parents didn't approve, they considered it a relatively harmless habit compared to other risks young adults faced. Sean, Chad's father, shared that his son always respected him and never used marijuana in front of him because he knew he hated it. Sean viewed marijuana as a bad habit that negatively impacted his son's mind and will. However, he never imagined that this would be the beginning of tragedies that would change everything. It was this habit that would eventually bring Chad into contact with a woman who would lead him into a devastating nightmare. Bryn was born on January 25, 1991, in Chicago, Illinois. Her early life was filled with challenges. She experienced serious health issues that required multiple surgeries and heavy medications, which affected both her body and her mind from a young age. These medical treatments took a severe toll on her hearing. By age 4, she needed cochlear implants to improve her hearing and help her learn to read lips. Growing up, Bryn often felt isolated and different. In school, she was usually the only student with hearing loss and sometimes hid her hearing aids to avoid teasing. As she grew older, Bryn turned what once made her feel ashamed into a source of strength. She went on to pursue a doctorate in biology at the University of Washington School of Medicine and graduated in the 2010 seconds with distinction. One of her professors later described her as one of the most exceptional students he had ever taught. In August 2017, at age 26, Bryn moved to Thousand Oaks to work as a biologist for UCLA Health, which is connected to the David Geffen School of Medicine. At first, she rented an apartment that didn't allow pets, so she had to leave her beloved Siberian Husky, Aria, with her family in Illinois. In April 2018, Bryn found a new pet-friendly apartment and was joyfully reunited with Aria. 2 years earlier, she had trained Aria to be a service animal, and having her dog back gave her renewed happiness and balance. The pair were often seen walking through Conejo Creek Park in Thousand Oaks, one of Bryn's favorite places to unwind. It was at that same park where Bryn first met Chad in late April 2018. According to her, Chad was the one who approached her several times when their paths crossed. Finally, he asked for her phone number, but she refused. Still, Chad gave her his business card and told her to reach out if she ever wanted to hang out. Not long after, Bryn initiated contact with Chad, and their chance encounters quickly developed into a romantic relationship. They shared meals, spent time with friends, and once enjoyed a bottle of Irish whiskey together while watching their dogs play at the park. Bryn was drawn to Chad's humor, yet warmth and thoughtfulness. Although she initially doubted their compatibility, she soon realized they complemented each other perfectly, like two pieces of a puzzle. On Sunday, May 27, 2018, the day before Memorial Day, Bryn spent the evening drinking with friends. Later that night, Chad contacted her and invited her over. Around 10:30 p.m., 27-year-old Bryn arrived at Chad's apartment with her dog, Aria. The two relaxed, had a few drinks, and chatted with Chad's roommate, Vinny. Shortly after midnight, Chad took out his water pipe, packed it with cannabis, and stepped onto the balcony to smoke. Bryn soon joined him and asked to try it. As soon as she inhaled, her throat burned, and she began coughing. She mentioned that she had never enjoyed cannabis and never felt its effects like others did. Curious, Chad packed the pipe again with even more cannabis and encouraged her to try once more so she could finally experience a high. Bryn agreed and took another hit. What happened next was terrifying and surreal. In the early hours of May 28, Thousand Oaks police received a frantic 911 call from Vinny, reporting that something terrible was happening in the apartment. When officers arrived, their body cameras captured a horrific scene. Bryn violently attacked Chad, stabbing him multiple times with kitchen utensils before self-harming. Police attempted to subdue her using a taser 4 times, but she did not react. Officers then used their batons, striking her 9 times until she finally released the weapon. Bryn suffered 5 fractures in one arm and deep cuts to her neck, base, and right hand. She had also attacked her dog, Aria, but the animal miraculously survived. Chad, however, did not. When police reached him, he was already dead, having been stabbed 108 times. Bryn was rushed to the emergency room and underwent emergency surgery, which saved her life. She was later admitted for further recovery. Once she regained consciousness, investigators began questioning her. Still intubated and unable to speak, she wrote her responses, claiming she had told Chad she didn't want to smoke anymore, but that he had forced her to. Investigators suspected she had no memory of what had happened, a fact they confirmed with her a few days later. When Bryn's health stabilized, she was arrested and charged with murder. The tragedy devastated both families. Chad's father, Sean, had the heartbreaking duty of telling his ex-wife, Michelle, about their son's death. He explained that he wanted to tell Michelle himself to be there for her in that shattering moment. Sean remembered seeing the light fade from her eyes as she realized their son was gone. From then on, Michelle fell into a deep depression. Sean later reflected that losing a child leaves a crushing guilt, a sense that happiness may never return. Michelle experienced exactly that, her grief compounded by her struggle with type 2 diabetes. After the funeral, Michelle felt undeserving of happiness. She refused to smile for photos or let anyone capture her appearing calm or content, believing that showing joy would disrespect her son's memory. Over time, this guilt consumed her, and she began to neglect her health. 18 months after Chad's death, she passed away from severe cardiac failure, having stopped her medical treatments. Sadly, Michelle didn't live to see the conclusion of Bryn's trial. Although no one can be certain, the repeated delays and eventual sentencing of her son's killer likely would have intensified her pain. Therefore, the first formal hearing was not held until November 9, 2023. In that long-awaited trial, Bryn Spacher, now 32 years old and fully recovered, finally testified before the jury. To aid Bryn's hearing impairment, real-time transcription monitoring devices were placed at both the witness stand and her table. Bryn began her testimony by describing her background and then recounted the night of May 27, 2018. She said that after smoking once, Chad encouraged her to try again. When she hesitated, he refilled the water pipe and urged her to inhale immediately to feel the effects. Bryn admitted that although he hadn't physically forced her, his insistence made her feel intimidated and unable to refuse. She testified that Chad wasn't always the gentle person others believed him to be. According to Bryn, she had seen flashes of his temper in the past, and those memories made her feel pressured to comply with his requests. Minutes after smoking a second time, she said she began to feel intensely disoriented. Time seemed to loop. Their conversation repeated, and every moment blurred into the next, creating a powerful sense of déjà vu. Bryn testified that she quickly lost the ability to speak coherently, her words dissolving into confusion. Panicked, she went inside, lay down on the couch, and closed her eyes to try to calm down. Instead of finding relief, she began hearing voices and seeing vivid, hallucinatory images behind her closed eyelids. She described the experience as being trapped in an endless cycle of fear, at one point believing she had died and was now imprisoned inside her own body. She said she heard her loved ones crying over her lifeless body and even felt their touch. But what she described next was even more surreal. Bryn claimed she had an out-of-body experience, observing from above as her body lay still on the couch. From that perspective, she said she saw Chad crying beside her while paramedics tried to revive her. Before continuing, she emphasized that everything after that point felt like watching a movie rather than living through it. In her account, she saw herself walking through the apartment, pushing chairs aside before entering the kitchen, where she grabbed 2 knives and threw them at Chad. Then, detached from any sense of control, she took 2 more knives and attacked one of the dogs. Bryn recalled hearing Chad's voice asking why she had hurt Athena, though she later learned it had actually been Arya. Moments later, she approached Chad, raised a knife, and then everything went black. Even while unconscious, she said she could still hear voices in her head, urging her to keep going. Among those voices were Vinny's panicked shouts as he ran from the apartment to get help. Bryn's hallucinations seemed endless, distorting her sense of time so much that she could no longer tell minutes from hours. Overwhelmed by the voices, she heard herself before everything faded away. When she regained consciousness briefly and incompletely, she was met not by clarity, but by chaos. She felt jolts of electricity rippling through her body as officers fired their tasers. Though in her disoriented state, she believed they were using a defibrillator to bring her back to life. She remembered waking up in the hospital as investigators began questioning her about the night's events. Her recollection, however, was fragmented, blurred between what had actually happened and what she might have imagined during her hallucinations. It wasn't until 2 days later that police informed her she had killed Chad. During the trial, the defense referred to forensic tests conducted on a water pipe found at the scene and brought in an expert to explain the results. Experts say that tests for detecting banned substances are not always completely accurate, as some compounds may go undetected. While the report confirmed the presence of THC, the main psychoactive compound in cannabis, the specialist noted that the substance could have been mixed with other drugs. This possibility was especially plausible if Chad had purchased the marijuana from an unlicensed dealer, who might have added other substances to enhance its effects or reduce costs. Although recreational marijuana was already legal in California at the time, Bryn's defense team argued that an important detail had been overlooked. Chad's roommate, Vinny, had also smoked the same substance earlier that night and claimed to have experienced hallucinations. The defense used this to argue that Bryn, an inexperienced user, didn't know what she was consuming and had been pressured into trying it without understanding the potential risks. Their case was supported by testimony from people who knew Bryn personally. Several former classmates stated that Bryn had always avoided banned substances, even distancing herself from friends who used them. One of them, 33-year-old Amy Kerouac, met Bryn in 2007 and described how they became close in high school through shared interests. While Bryn played basketball and Amy played softball, Both bonded over their love of outdoor activities like hiking and camping, which were uncommon among their peers. Bryn's first encounter with marijuana occurred in 2014 while she was dating Kevin, a former Marine and personal trainer. During a camping trip in the Washington Mountains, they decided to try a joint but quickly found they didn't enjoy it. Kevin later said he believed Chad may have pressured Bryn into smoking on the night in question in 2018. Although Bryn and Kevin broke up in 2017 when she moved to California, he described her as easygoing, kind, and genuine. Given these circumstances, the defense built their argument around the idea that Bryn had been unknowingly intoxicated. According to the California Penal Code, a person may be exempt from criminal liability if they commit an offense under duress or as a result of consuming a controlled substance without their knowledge. Despite this reasoning, the jury rejected the defense's argument. The biggest obstacle for both sides was Bryn's written statement to police while she was hospitalized. In it, she admitted that she had voluntarily taken a second hit from Chad's pipe. Later, Bryn claimed the document had been withheld from the prosecution for some time. However, during one hearing, the prosecutor presented new evidence that significantly altered the case. She portrayed Bryn very differently, presenting text messages from 2018 between Bryn and her friends. In these messages, Bryn wrote about getting so high that she had to miss work the next day and mentioned eating cannabis-infused edibles. This evidence allowed the prosecution to question not only Bryn's earlier statements but also her overall credibility. The prosecutor also highlighted that in most of Bryn's interviews with investigators and doctors, she never mentioned being pressured or coerced. Bryn responded directly to these accusations, saying she sometimes exaggerated when talking with friends, but maintained she had never been so intoxicated that she blacked out or missed work because of marijuana. The only time she had been late, she said, was once after drinking alcohol. Regarding the interrogations, she explained that she didn't repeat every detail because she thought the detectives already knew the facts. After repeatedly restating her responses to challenge the prosecution's claims, the defense called mental health experts to testify. Their evaluations confirmed that Bryn had no history of mental illness or violent tendencies, supporting the argument that her actions were the result of a marijuana-induced psychotic episode. This evidence seriously weakened the prosecution's case and led the jury to reduce the charge. On December 1, 2023, after just 4 hours of deliberation, the jury reached a verdict. Bryn Spacher was guilty of involuntary manslaughter, not murder. The decision shocked Chad's family and friends, who had hoped for a harsher outcome. On the evening of January 22, 2024, the night before sentencing, Chad's loved ones gathered outside the county government building to demand justice and a punishment that reflected the brutality of his death. The following day, the courtroom was packed with people, including members of the public, journalists, and Chad's family. When Bryn took the stand one final time, she delivered an emotional apology to Chad's family, addressing her words especially to his father, who continued to mourn his son without Michelle by his side. After nearly 6 years of waiting and suffering, the judge handed down the sentence. Bryn received 2 years of probation, instead of the 5 years of imprisonment initially recommended. She also had to complete 100 hours of community service, focusing on education about marijuana-induced psychosis. The judge warned that any violation of probation would result in immediate imprisonment. In the aftermath, Sean O'Melia, still mourning his son, denounced the ruling as unfair and biased, suggesting that Bryn's gender and race may have influenced the court's leniency. He also expressed concern that the verdict sent a dangerous message, implying that marijuana users could excuse reckless or criminal acts. Sean suggested that Bryn needed a psychiatric evaluation to better understand the biological causes, as he believed that marijuana alone could not explain the full severity of her psychosis. The prosecutor also shared this concern, arguing that the sentence was too lenient, setting a dangerous precedent and damaging the credibility of the justice system. She argued that classifying the case as involuntary manslaughter ignored the brutality of the act, describing it as one of the most disturbing cases in her 29-year career. The outcome of Brynn's trial and Chad's tragic death fueled a broader public debate about recreational marijuana use. A leading forensic psychiatrist noted that the growing acceptance of cannabis has led to widespread misinformation about its risks. He emphasized that while psychotic reactions are uncommon, they can be severe, and studies show a clear link between cannabis use and psychosis. As public criticism mounted, Brynn's trial became a focal point for larger discussions about marijuana's potential dangers. People began to question whether cannabis directly causes violent behavior or acts only as a trigger when combined with other psychological or environmental factors. While you can't control everything in life, leaving your safety to chance is a dangerous gamble. On the night of April 25, 1990, several motorists were driving near a motel on a remote stretch of road in Oklahoma City when they noticed scattered women's belongings lying across the asphalt. Curious, they stopped and found a young blonde woman face down on the roadside, convulsing. Emergency services were called immediately, and she was rushed to the hospital. Doctors initially concluded she had been the victim of a hit-and-run collision. By the next day, the unidentified woman remained in intensive care. She had suffered a closed head injury and was placed on medication to reduce brain swelling. That afternoon, an older man arrived, introducing himself as Clarence Marcus Hughes, claiming he was her husband. He said they lived in Tulsa, several hours away, and that his wife, whom he called Tanya, worked as a dancer, but Clarence's demeanor immediately raised suspicions, as did the old bruises on Tanya's body, injuries clearly inflicted long before the supposed accident. Then, despite the efforts of the staff, Tanya passed away on April 30, just days before her 21st birthday. Friends from the dance club where she worked were saddened by her death. They reached out to who they thought was her mother to express their sympathy. However, the woman revealed a shocking truth. Her biological daughter had died 20 years ago, at 18 months old, and she'd never had other children. Everyone was baffled by this information. Tanya's co-workers knew her only as a bright young woman who read constantly and dreamed of going to school. Her husband, Clarence, was controlling and strict, keeping both her and their son, Michael Anthony Hughes, under tight watch. He refused to let Tanya take the boy out alone. People frequently noticed the bruises on her body. Whenever asked, she blamed clumsiness, a fall here, a bump there, excuses that grew less believable each time. Many suspected Clarence was abusing her, though Tanya always denied it. Only a few close friends knew she desperately wanted to escape him but feared for her son's safety. In that context, when she died, suspicions immediately shifted toward Clarence. Authorities questioned whether such a controlling man was fit to care for a 2-year-old. On May 1, 1990, Child Protective Services took Michael into emergency custody, placing him temporarily with foster parents Merle and Ernest Bean. The Beans immediately noticed disturbing behavior. The little boy could not tolerate being told no and would erupt into violent tantrums. He has strange habits, like drinking milk from Pepsi cans and banging his head on the floor. Despite this, they were determined to help him. They gradually changed his habits, taught him structure, and helped him learn to drink milk from a cup. Gradually, Michael became calmer and more secure. But every scheduled meeting with Clarence triggered a dramatic shift. The child would panic, hide under furniture, and cry that he didn't want to see the bad man. Although Clarence had been granted supervised visitation while attempting to regain custody, each interaction made the Beans more uneasy. Eventually, they demanded a paternity test. The results were unequivocal. Clarence was not Michael's biological father. His visitation rights were revoked immediately. A huge relief for the foster family, but the danger had only begun. Within a week of Clarence losing visitation, Merle noticed cars slowing as they passed her home. Always the same vehicle. Always creeping by. As if someone were watching the house. She reported it to the police, telling them the man behind the wheel looked exactly like Clarence. Officers ran the plate. It was registered to him. Even though this confirmation was worrying, her concerns were ignored, and no one questioned the man who was unwilling to accept losing access to the boy. On September 12, 1994, after more than 4 years in the care of Merle and Ernest Bean, and just as they was nearing full legal custody, an event occurred. At the time, 6-year-old Michael Anthony Hughes was a first grader at Choctaw Elementary School in Choctaw, Oklahoma. That morning, a man identifying himself as Clarence Hughes walked into the school, armed with a gun. He confronted the principal, James Davis, pointed a gun at him, and threatened to kill him at any resistance. He forced the principal to remove Michael from the classroom. The three left the school using James's pickup truck. Clarence drove them to a remote wooded area outside of town, where he handcuffed James to a tree and wrapped his mouth, face, in duct tape. Then he fled with Michael in a stolen vehicle. James was found approximately 4 hours later by passers-by who alerted law enforcement. The FBI immediately launched a federal kidnapping investigation, focusing on Clarence Hughes, the man who insisted he was Michael's father. But investigators soon uncovered something alarming. After the death of his wife, Tanya, Clarence had applied for Social Security benefits using a number belonging to a man named Franklin Delano Floyd. Agents discovered that over the years, this man had used multiple aliases, including Trenton Davis, Warren Marshall, and now Clarence Marcus Hughes. His criminal history was extensive and violent. In 1962, Floyd had kidnapped a 4-year-old girl in Georgia, taken her into the woods, and abused her. He was sentenced to 10 to 20 years in prison. Later that year, he was transferred to a Georgia State hospital for psychiatric evaluation. In early 1963, while being transported for a medical appointment, he escaped custody, fled to Macon, and robbed a bank before being recaptured. Floyd was paroled in 1972. But just months later, in early 1973, he again attacked a woman and attempted to assault her. She managed to escape. Floyd was arrested but made bail, and by June he had disappeared. A warrant was issued, but despite an active search, he remained a fugitive for over 2 decades. Now, with a kidnapped child in his hands, the urgency to find him skyrocketed. Investigators also began to re-examine the suspicious death of the woman Floyd had been living with, Tanya. Although her autopsy listed her injuries as caused by a hit-and-run accident, agents now suspected she might have been fleeing Floyd, and that he had murdered her. As part of the public appeal for leads, media outlets began broadcasting Tanya's photo across the country. A few days later, a woman named Jenny Fisher contacted the FBI. She claimed she recognized the woman in the broadcasts, her best friend from high school in Forest Park, Georgia. The woman's name wasn't Tanya Hughes at all. She was Suzanne Marie Savakis, also known as Sharon, and the man calling himself her husband was actually her stepfather. Known to Jenny by the name Warren Marshall, Jenny described Sharon as a brilliant, kind, outgoing girl, a top reserve officers training corps student, a science club member, and part of the gifted program. Sharon had earned a full scholarship to Georgia Tech and dreamed of becoming an aerospace engineer. But one day, Sharon called Jenny sobbing. She was pregnant. She said the child's father demanded she give up the baby and had forbidden her from going to college. Jenny remembered Warren as a frightening controlling presence. Someone who openly hit Sharon even when others were watching. Sharon always said her mother died in a car accident when she was in 2nd grade. Jenny also revealed other deeply disturbing details. Once, when visiting Sharon's home, she noticed a drawer full of lingerie, items no teenage girl living without a mother would have bought herself. Sharon admitted quietly that her father bought them for her. Jenny didn't fully understand the implications at the time. But now, with the knowledge of Franklin Delano, Floyd's identity and history, the horrifying truth snapped into place. Jenny had slept over at the Marshall's house, but only once. She noticed that Sharon's room had a curtain instead of a door. As they were getting ready for bed in their pajamas, the father ran into the room with a gun and ordered the classmate to lie down on the floor and put a pillow over her head. At gunpoint, he abused his daughter, Sharon. The next morning, Sharon explained that this was a common occurrence in their household. Jenny was so frightened that she never returned to the house and, until then, hadn't told anyone about the sleepover. Investigators now began gathering information about Sharon's life history. It was known that she was born on September 6, 1969. However, Franklin Delano Floyd was incarcerated during this period, ruling out the possibility that he was Sharon's biological father. Given that the perpetrator had previously kidnapped a child, it was assumed he had abducted Sharon at a young age. This meant she had been under his care for at least 15 years before her death. Floyd was still on the run. FBI agents suggested he might return to the state where he obtained his driver's license to renew it. It worked. Floyd was soon spotted in Louisville, Kentucky. On November 10, 1994, FBI agents went to his address. The 51-year-old suspect was located, surrounded, and detained. However, Michael was not with him. Neighbors stated they had never seen any children around him. When detectives asked him about the boy's whereabouts, he replied that Michael was alive, had been left with a wealthy man who was looking after him, and that he would be fine. Of course, this was considered a lie, especially since he couldn't even name the guardian. No one believed the child was still alive. It was clear that winning a murder case without a body would be very difficult. The search continued. This dangerous repeat offender urgently needed to be locked up and isolated from society. Franklin Delano Floyd was charged with kidnapping, possession of a firearm, car theft, and a long list of other crimes. The school principal, James Davis, testified at the trial, provided incriminating testimony against Floyd. He was found guilty on all counts and sentenced to 52 years in prison without parole. Agents discovered that the principal's pickup truck had been found abandoned in Texas a month after Michael's abduction. In 1995, a mechanic from Kansas purchased the car at auction, began repairing it. He disassembled the car and found a large envelope hidden between the body and the top of the gas tank. Inside were 97 shocking photographs of girls, children, and women in explicit poses, including one of Sharon at approximately 4 or 5 years old. There was also an image of an unidentified young woman who had sustained such severe injuries that investigators presumed her dead. However, her identity remained unknown. Most of the women in these images had distinct tan lines. It was assumed they all lived in warm, sunny areas. On March 29, 1995, a road crew discovered skeletal human remains in Pinellas County, Florida. A 4-day search recovered 90% of the skeleton, a breast implant, clothing, and jewelry. The deceased could not be identified initially. However, it was obvious she was the victim of a violent crime. As her skull was fractured, there were 2 bullet holes in the back of her head. A year after the remains were discovered, the FBI provided investigators with an image of the unidentified woman from Lloyd's photos. Examining the photo, they noticed a shirt wrapped around her neck that matched an item of clothing found with the skeletal remains. Dental records then allowed them to identify the victim as Cheryl Ann Comesso, who had disappeared in 1989. Investigators discovered that before her disappearance, Cheryl worked as a dancer at a club in Tampa. Her colleagues and acquaintances revealed that she was a close friend of Sharon and spent a lot of time with Sharon and her father. Warren. Everyone who knew Warren warned Cheryl to stay away from him. Cheryl was aware of rumors about Warren and Sharon's relationship, but she didn't confirm them until much later. One of the dancers from the club, a woman named Heather Lane, agreed to cooperate fully with investigators. She recalled an unsettling incident from 1988, when the dancers were hired to perform at a private party. Everyone understood that no intimate contact was allowed. But that night, Heather saw Sharon quietly offering intimate services for $50. Alarmed, she pulled Sharon aside. Sharon admitted her father had ordered her to do it, that he needed the money, and that he had even bought her condoms beforehand. Heather had long heard disturbing rumors about the Marshalls, but seeing this with her own eyes confirmed her worst fears. She was horrified and deeply shaken. Not long after, Sharon became pregnant and later gave birth to Michael. Motherhood transformed her. She adored the baby and often told close friends that having Michael was the greatest blessing of her life. Yet she never revealed who the child's father was. One night in 1989, Heather saw Warren in his pickup truck outside the club, shouting aggressively at Cheryl Ann Cameso. The two were in a heated argument, and Warren openly threatened to kill her. Heather considered intervening, but Warren warned he would run her over if she didn't walk away. Cheryl eventually climbed into his truck. She vanished soon after. Cheryl was only 18 years old when she disappeared in April 1989. Weeks later, her bright red Corvette was found abandoned near Brandon, Florida. The search turned up nothing. Shortly after Cheryl's disappearance, Sharon and Warren abruptly fled Tampa. A neighbor later reported watching their trailer explode soon after they left. Investigators eventually concluded they had set fire to the trailer to destroy evidence after Cheryl's murder, which authorities believed was committed by Warren. Soon, both changed their names. Sharon began calling herself Tanya, and Warren adopted the identity Clarence Marcus Hughes. Investigators would later learn the names were pulled from gravestones the pair had seen in Alabama. To further complicate things, the two stopped in Louisiana and legally married, allowing Sharon, now Tonya, to take the surname Hughes. In 2001, while Floyd was awaiting trial for the murder of Cameso, Judge Nancy Lay ruled that he was incompetent to stand trial and ordered him to undergo an additional psychiatric evaluation. Floyd challenged the evaluation, asserting that he was competent. A few months later, the judge reversed the earlier ruling and ordered Floyd to stand trial. He was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to death. In 2002, journalist Matt Birkbeck stumbled upon a missing persons photograph of a young girl sitting on the lap of a man believed to be her father. Instantly, Matt recognized her as Sharon, Suzanne Marie Savakis. Shocked by the tragic complexity of her life, he decided to investigate further. Wanting answers, he requested an interview with Franklin Delano Floyd in prison. When they met, Floyd seemed eager to tell his own version of events. He claimed he was born in 1943, raised in an orphanage after his father died, and abused throughout his childhood. He denied all wrongdoing, insisting Sharon had always stayed with him willingly and that he had left Michael with a wealthy man who would care for him. Matt didn't believe a word of it, but the interview became material for his first book in 2004. Still, many crucial questions remained unanswered. To Matt, one truth was obvious. Floyd was deeply disturbed. His second book, published in 2008, brought renewed public attention to the case. Online communities began to speculate about Sharon's origins, who she really was, and from whom she might have been stolen. Then came a turning point. Back in 2005, Matt had received a letter from a young woman asking whether her DNA could help identify Sharon. Her name was Megan Dufresne, and she was Sharon's biological daughter. Megan had been adopted at birth. Only in high school did she stumble across Matt's book and begin to suspect the horrifying truth about her mother's past. The more she learned, the more devastated and enraged she became. Everything Sharon had suffered, kidnapping, abuse, Isolation had shaped the life of a mother Megan never got to know. For most of her life, Megan believed her biological mother had died in a car accident. Only later did she learn the truth. In 1989, Tanya gave birth to a daughter while living in New Orleans. The daughter was put up for adoption. Her name was Megan. When Megan took a DNA test in 2010 hoping to find relatives, investigators made a startling discovery. Her biological mother had given birth at least 3 times. The first child was born while Sharon was still in high school, but nothing was known about his fate. Then came Michael in 1988, and finally Megan in 1989. The identities of all 3 fathers remain unknown. Some believe Sharon may have had a boyfriend in school, but many also suspected Floyd himself might be the father. Though DNA testing proved Michael was not biologically related to him, in 2011, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children joined the investigation. Working alongside an FBI agent, they arranged a meeting with Franklin Delano Floyd in hopes of finally learning the truth about the children. But Floyd was a pathological liar. Getting reliable information from him seemed almost impossible. In 2014, 2 FBI agents visited Floyd in prison. They began by attempting to identify Sharon, but he rambled, misidentified them as lawyers, and complained endlessly. When they revealed they were with the FBI, he suddenly changed course, insisting he wanted Michael's case closed. Then, in a jarring emotional shift, Floyd began to cry, abruptly stopped, and claimed he had shot the boy twice in the back of the head to end his suffering. According to Floyd, he had kidnapped Michael to raise him as his own. But the child became uncontrollable the very day of the abduction. Instead of returning him, Floyd said he killed him near the Oklahoma-Texas border. Merle and Ernest Bean, the couple who had cared for Michael for 4 years and considered him their son, were devastated. Searches were conducted in March 2015 around the area Floyd described, but the land was vast, and wild boars, known to consume bone, roamed the region. Investigators hoped to find shell casings or clothing, but nothing was recovered. With no remains found, detectives turned their attention back to the truth behind Sharon's identity. During further questioning, Floyd launched into a bizarre monologue about being the most handsome bus driver in North Carolina, claiming that was how he met a woman named Sandra Frances Brandenburg in 1974. At the time, Sandy was a single mother of 4 children in a desperate situation. Floyd said he introduced himself as Brandon Williams, one of many aliases he used. According to his story, Sharon was actually Suzanne Marie Savakis, Sandra Frances Brandenburg's missing eldest daughter. Agents began verifying this claim nearly 40 years after the abduction. Both Sandra and her ex-husband, Clifford Ray Savakis, were still alive and able to provide crucial details. Suzanne had been born in Livonia, Michigan, on September 6, 1969. Her father, Clifford, was drafted into the Vietnam War and first met his daughter when she was 6 months old. When he returned home, he and Sandra eventually separated. Sandra remarried and raised her children in a trailer. Struggling with poverty for years, their already difficult life worsened when a tornado destroyed their home, leaving Sandra traumatized and overwhelmed. When she sought assistance from social services, she was informed she risked losing custody of her children. Clifford, only 23 at the time, tried to help, but he too was facing financial hardship. So when Sandra met Brandon Williams, he appeared to be a blessing, at least at first. Initially, he was supportive and even helped her retain custody of her children. But shortly after they married, his behavior turned dark. He who had once seemed protective became paranoid and violent. He would grab a knife and stalk Sandra through the house, insisting she could never leave him, even when there was no hint of separation. And within months, he kidnapped her children, changing their lives forever. Continued to struggle financially. One day, in desperation, Sandra used a counterfeit check to buy groceries. She was arrested and spent a month in jail. While she was incarcerated, her children remained in the custody of her husband. But when Sandy was released, she returned home to find the house empty. Panicked, she contacted the police. After learning the children had been taken by their stepfather, officers told her they couldn't intervene because, in the eyes of the law, the man had parental rights. A long search eventually led authorities to two of the missing girls, Allison and Amy, who had been left at a local church. But Suzanne and Philip were gone. Their whereabouts remained a mystery for decades. Floyd had fled Texas with Suzanne, first taking her to Oklahoma. When she entered elementary school there, she was enrolled under her real name. 9 years later, they moved again, this time to Georgia, where she became known as Sharon or Suzanne Marshall. It wasn't until June 3, 2017, that her tombstone was finally corrected to reflect her true identity, Suzanne Marie Savakis. Years later, after becoming a mother herself, Sharon's daughter, Megan Dufresne, named her firstborn son Michael, honoring the half-brother she never got to meet. Then, on March 7, 2019, author Matt Birkbeck received a message from a man in North Carolina named Stevie. Stevie explained that after his father's death, his mother confessed the truth about his past. She showed him documents revealing that his real name was Philip Brandenburg. Stevie's adoptive mother told him that decades earlier, a nervous young woman named Sandra had appeared at her home, holding a little boy. Sandra said she was leaving town with her new husband and her other children, and could not care for him. In the distance, the woman remembered seeing a tense, quiet man, Franklin Delano Floyd, watching. In February 2020, a DNA test confirmed what investigators had long suspected. Stevie is Philip Brandenburg, Sandra's biological son and Suzanne's younger brother. As for Franklin Delano Floyd, he lived far longer than many believed he deserved. On January 23, 2023, at the age of 79, he died of natural causes at the Ryford Correctional Facility in Florida, never having faced the death penalty. To this day, he is believed to have been responsible for the deaths of Suzanne, Michael, and possibly other unknown victims. Michael's body has never been found. What if a young woman could disappear in one of the world's largest cities without leaving a trace? What if every clue conflicted with the last? Every witness remembered something different, and the people who claimed to help her were the ones putting her in danger. This is the story of Corinna Slusser, a 19-year-old who came to New York City, hoping for a fresh start, only to be pulled into a world of manipulation, false promises, and hidden threats behind friendly faces. In the weeks before she vanished, Corinna shared glamorous photos and optimistic captions online, trying to appear in control while her life unraveled. Strained relationships, risky friendships, and the growing influence of two men who would ultimately shape her fate. On September 20th, 2017, she walked out of a motel in Queens and was never seen again. To understand how she ended up there, alone, vulnerable, and isolated, we must return to the beginning, to the life she was struggling to rebuild before everything fell apart. Corinna Slusser was born on March 6, 1998, in Bloomsburg, Pennsylvania. After her parents divorced, she was raised by her mother, Sabina Tuordo. Corinna was an outgoing, engaged student who did well academically. In high school, she often took part in cheerleading, kept up with makeup and fashion trends, and maintained an Instagram account to share positive images of herself and her future dreams. Corinna had dreamed of becoming a makeup artist. However, in 2016, signs of trouble began to appear. She changed her friends, started skipping school, and was influenced by a new group. That same year, she was arrested for petty theft, which marked a turning point in her behavior. She grew irritable, distanced herself from her family, and often came home with expensive things she couldn't afford, worrying her mother. By spring 2017, Corinna was in emotional and mental distress. In April, she attempted self-harm and was hospitalized. After being discharged, she moved to Hazleton to live with a friend and start over. She got a job as a waitress at a cheap restaurant, probably an Applebee's or something similar. At first, life was relatively stable. She had a job, a small income, but was independent. But soon, she began spending more than she earned and sought easy money. Messages later showed that she started seeing men who gave her gifts, cash, and helped with her living expenses. At first, she described this as being a sugar baby, but it quickly became an unhealthy dependency. As her financial problems grew, tensions rose between her and her friend, and eventually, she had nowhere to stay. Her relationship with her mother also completely broke down. Her mother, Sabina, warned her of the danger she was in, but she reacted with anger. On Instagram, Corinna consistently posted glamorous, filtered photos with confident captions, saying she was strong and about to move into her first apartment. Despite the fact that she was living in unstable, temporary housing, her posts then transitioned to photos taken in random apartments and rundown motels, showing her life in increasing chaos. By summer 2017, Corinna's situation had worsened. Financial stress, conflicts with her mother, and dependence on online relationships made her vulnerable to exploitation. What had once felt like freedom turned into a series of bad decisions. During this time, she met a 32-year-old man named Giovanni Peguero, who promised her a new beginning in New York City. On August 19, 2017, Corinna arrived in New York and was picked up by Giovanni. He seemed confident and caring, and told her he would help her find an apartment and a steady job. He took her to the Harlem Vista Hotel, paid for a few nights, and said it was just a temporary place to stay until they found an apartment and a job. Corinna trusted him, since she was in a strange city and didn't know anyone. At first, everything seemed fine. Giovanni brought her meals, took her shopping, and stayed close to her. He slowly began controlling her, telling her who to speak to, taking her ID and documents to help with apartment paperwork, and monitoring her phone. Gradually, he commented on her photos and scolded her whenever she talked to other men. Corinna didn't realize she was being manipulated. By August 21, they began arguing. He accused her of disappointing him and demanded she act the right way. He only allowed her to go out with him, isolated her from friends, blocked her contacts, and undermined her relationship with her mother, insisting no one cared about her except him. Corinna was becoming trapped and cut off from the outside world. On August 25, the first known violent incident occurred. Giovanni attacked Corinna in her Harlem Vista hotel room, pushing her onto the bed, choking her and screaming. Corinna said that the reason was because he took $300 from her. Corinna called the police, who documented her injuries and took her statement. Giovanni was arrested and charged with assault and strangulation. After Giovanni's arrest, Corinna was left in complete isolation. She had no papers, no money, and no one to help her. She only had enough money to stay in a hotel for a few days, and then she was forced to leave. Although she told her friends she was managing fine and staying in control, her situation was steadily deteriorating. Without identification, she couldn't find work, rent a place, or access official support. Despite this, Corinna stayed in New York, with no intention of returning home due to her strained relationship with her mother. She began searching online for places to stay. meeting men through apps and social media. Although she continued to post smiling pictures and positive quotes on Instagram, in reality, she had to spend the night at the homes of strangers, men she met online. They offered her temporary shelter or a little help in exchange for her attention. These arrangements were unsafe and unstable, leaving her increasingly vulnerable. Some men shared her personal information, demanded intimate photos, or suggested posting escort ads for her online. By early September 2017, her photos appeared on escort service websites. They were likely posted without her consent, and while no name was listed, her friends easily recognized her. The phone numbers in the ads changed frequently, and some pictures were altered. Even though she wasn't yet controlled by one person, she was already being drawn into exploitation. Around that time, a 21-year-old man, Ishi Woni, contacted her. He knew Giovanni and, as later became clear, operated within the same circles. Ishi offered to help Corinna through her ordeal, promising safe housing and financial support. He presented himself as knowledgeable and trustworthy, and convinced her to move temporarily to the Haven Motel in Queens. But this was the first step in making her completely dependent on him. Within days at the Haven Motel, Ishi began posting ads with her photos. He set the prices, wrote the descriptions, and controlled all communication with clients. Corinna was forced to obey his rules. Their messages show his dominance. He demanded constant updates, obedience, and gratitude. Her movements were restricted, and he tracked her phone, and she gradually lost all freedom. At the motel, there were other girls in similar situations. The tension increased, leading to competition, jealousy, and conflict. Corinna sometimes resisted or tried to act on her own but soon backed down, uncertain where to find help. By then, her identity was tied to multiple online profiles and phone numbers, trapping her deeper in exploitation. Technically, she was free to leave, but without money, ID, or support, escape was nearly impossible. On September 20, 2017, Corinna was last seen leaving the motel. Witnesses and security footage confirmed her departure. From that moment, she vanished. By the time she was declared missing, she had already fallen under someone else's control. What began as an offer of help ended with her losing all autonomy. At first, no one realized she was missing. Given the chaos in her life, her silence didn't seem unusual. Friends assumed she had changed her phone number, and her mother thought she was simply upset. Several days passed before anyone understood that something was truly wrong. In late September, Sabina Tuordo, Corinna's mother, returned from Florida and found the house unusually quiet. Corinna wasn't answering messages, and all the belongings she'd left before leaving for New York were still untouched. Sabina then contacted the Bloomsburg Police Department. Initially, officers treated it as a voluntary disappearance by an adult. But when Sabina presented a copy of the restraining order against Giovanni, along with letters he had sent after his arrest, the case was transferred to New York authorities. Investigators began examining Corinna's online activity and financial records. One of the first leads took them to the Haven Motel in Queens. The manager confirmed that a young woman matching Corinna's description had stayed there in September with a younger man who paid in cash. She appeared tired and spoke very little. The last sighting of her was on September 20th. After she left, the room remained empty for 2 days until housekeeping arrived. Inside, staff found a few belongings, makeup, a pharmacy receipt, and an empty purse. But her phone, identification, and clothes were gone. Police later discovered that the room was booked under a false name, and the payments were traced to Ishi's debit card. When questioned, Ishi claimed that Corinna had left on her own and denied knowing where she went. He said she had been communicating with someone from the Bronx, but offered no further details. Investigators also found that his phone had been wiped and the SIM card replaced. A digital investigation revealed that In the week before her disappearance, Corinna had visited escort service websites using her phone. Although her listings had been deleted, cached copies were recovered. They had been posted from IP addresses in the Bronx and Queens, the same areas where Ishii and his associates operated. The ads were created in batches, using similar wording, descriptions, and photos of different women. As the investigation expanded, authorities found links between Corinna and people connected to a man named Giovanni Peguero. One witness confirmed that Corinna had worked with their group for a short time before another guy, who matched Ishii's description, took over. This was the first time police confirmed that Giovanni and Ishii were part of the same network. Though solid proof was still lacking, no one had reported abuse, and Corinna was legally an adult. By November 2017, investigators began to suspect that Corinna might have been taken out of New York. They checked transportation hubs and reviewed surveillance footage but found no sign of her. The last signal from her phone came late at night on September 20th in the Bronx, after which it went silent permanently. The case came to a standstill. Reports repeatedly mentioned three names: Corinna, Giovanni, and Ishii. Everything pointed to that final day, but what happened afterward remained uncertain. She could have left voluntarily, met with harm, or been transferred to another network. None of these theories could be confirmed. Corinna's mother, Sabina, refused to give up. As the official investigation slowed, she became determined to keep attention on her daughter's case. She began by posting on Facebook, contacting journalists, and writing to the police. Most of the time, she received only standard replies. The investigation is ongoing. Concerned the case would fade from memory, she started reaching out to online communities focused on missing persons. Corinna's photos began circulating on forums and public groups across New York City. Sabina personally searched listings, sometimes thinking she recognized her daughter in new images. Every lead she found, she passed on to investigators, who always promised to follow up. By November 2017, Sabina realized that it was necessary to attract public attention. She spoke with local TV stations in Pennsylvania and shared details about Giovanni's arrest and Corinna's last known stay at the Haven Motel. That media coverage was the first major breakthrough. The story spread quickly online, and strangers began contacting her about sightings of Corinna on the subway, in Atlantic City, and elsewhere. Sabina passed all the information to the police, which led to dozens of leads, none of which were ever verified. Still, the growing attention ensured that Corinna's case could not be forgotten. Sabina then created a page called Help Find Corinna Slusser to raise awareness and collect funds for a reward. Within a month, thousands of people had joined. Volunteers helped design flyers and share posts online. Sabina traveled to New York herself, posting flyers throughout the Bronx and Queens. On one occasion, she was fined for unauthorized posting. At the same time, a legal battle began to unfold. Sabina hired a lawyer and demanded that her daughter's case be included in a federal anti-trafficking initiative. Her efforts paid off. The case was reclassified from a voluntary disappearance to a high-risk missing person investigation with suspected exploitation. That changed everything. Homeland Security became involved, investigating Ishii's connections, looking for other victims, and tracking similar criminal networks. Corinna's name was added to the Federal Missing Persons Database. In December 2017, the FBI offered a $10,000 reward for any information leading to the case. The story spread nationwide. Under media pressure, Ishii was questioned again. He denied all involvement, claiming Corinna was an adult who had made her own choices. He insisted he hadn't seen her after September 20th and didn't know where she went. Then a breakthrough came. One of Ishii's former acquaintances, a young woman, contacted Sabina's attorney. She described a darker reality: manipulation, threats, rules, and debts that kept the girls trapped. Leaving without permission, she said, was considered betrayal. This was the first circumstantial evidence that Corinna had not voluntarily disappeared. Sabina refused to give up. She visited shelters, spoke with staff at victim support organizations, shared Corinna's photo, and left her contact information. By January 2018, other mothers began reaching out to Sabina. Their daughters had vanished under similar circumstances. Online connections, promises of opportunities, trips to New York, and then silence. Sabina realized her daughter's case wasn't an isolated event. She started collaborating with anti-trafficking groups and speaking publicly. Sabina came to accept several possibilities. Corinna might have been taken. She might have died, or she could be hiding, too afraid to return. But as long as Corinna wasn't found, there was still hope. And Sabina fought to keep that hope alive, for herself and for others. Meanwhile, investigators gathered every piece of evidence they could. They interviewed everyone connected to the case, analyzed online activity, and traced IP addresses linked to Corinna. Still, no major breakthroughs emerged. She had vanished in a city where hundreds go missing. The evidence was weak, the witnesses uncertain, and nothing concrete enough to press charges. Sabina continued her work alone. She kept detailed notes of every call, message, and new lead. This record later became the foundation for a public database that tracked Corinna's disappearance almost hour by hour. Sabina's persistence kept the case alive. While investigators stayed silent, she spoke out. As the city moved on, her voice became the last one, speaking for a daughter the world had almost forgotten. When Corinna Slusser's case was made a federal matter, several agencies stepped in: the FBI, the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York, and Homeland Security. They believe her disappearance was related to abuse, which allowed them to use more advanced investigative tools, including telecommunications data and restricted databases from classified advertising websites. Agents started by reviewing Corinna's digital trail. They traced phone numbers and IP addresses, uncovering dozens of ads featuring her images. Some had been posted in October and November 2017, after she went missing, suggesting someone continued to use her likeness. The ads didn't mention her name but matched her images exactly, right down to poses, angles, and identifying marks. The phone numbers change frequently, but some have been linked to previous criminal investigations involving escorts. The FBI found that many phone numbers had been disguised through call forwarding services. Further analysis showed that some of these lines were registered under the names of women previously linked to Ishi Wani. This led agents to broaden the list of potential accomplices and revealed that Ishi's operations were well organized and extensive, not just the work of one man. The scheme involved fake advertisements, proxies, and rental properties obtained with forged documents. Search warrants were issued for Ishi's digital devices and those of his associates. The seized smartphones contained key evidence: photos of Corinna Slusser, encrypted client chats, and audio messages with direct orders and threats. Investigators also found group conversations about prices, meeting places, and how often encounters occurred. The repeated phrase, "she can't say no," appeared in multiple messages, combined with victim statements. This showed that Corinna had no control over her situation and had been coerced. The FBI interviewed dozens of women who had worked with Ishi. Their testimonies varied. Some were frightened, others had left earlier, and a few still felt afraid of him. Some remembered hearing Corinna's name, while others saw her picture on Ishi's phone. Several admitted that Ishi rotated ad listings among different women depending on availability or client payment, which explained why Corinna's name and photos kept appearing even after her disappearance. Meanwhile, investigators tracked transportation and surveillance data from Queens and the Bronx, placing Ishi near the Haven Motel. Footage from the day Corinna vanished showed him leaving the motel alone, without any belongings. Although Ishi claimed he didn't know what happened to her, his actions told a different story. Motel logs and call records showed he continued to use Corinna's phone number after September 20. directly contradicting his statements and deepening suspicion that he was hiding information. Federal prosecutors began preparing formal charges. The main charge focused on human trafficking under aggravated circumstances, including coercion, threats, and exploitation of a minor. Corinna was 19 when she met Ishi, and investigators believed her trafficking was part of a broader organized network. Authorities also investigated other women's cases linked to Ishi to establish a pattern of exploitation. Building the case, even without a recovered body, the search for Corinna targeted every location associated with Ishi: rented properties, places he visited, and transportation hubs. Multiple raids produced little direct evidence related to Corinna, but in one operation, investigators found belongings of another young woman who later reported she had been abused by Ishi. Her testimony strengthened the prosecution's case and supported a broader indictment. By spring 2018, the investigation entered a new phase. Authorities formed an international task force, suspecting Corinna might have been taken out of the country to Canada or the Dominican Republic. Interpol was contacted, but no biometric data matched. Investigators concluded there were only two likely outcomes. Corinna was either deceased or being held somewhere in the US. Completely isolated, the FBI expanded its list of suspects to at least 6 individuals connected to Ishi and the online ads. None could confirm seeing Corinna after September 20, and none provided concrete leads on her whereabouts. The investigation ran into a common but intractable problem: no body, no direct witnesses, and no clear endpoint. But thanks to the evidence they gathered, dozens of gigabytes of data, testimony from other women, and digital clues, investigators built a solid case. All of it suggested that Corinna's disappearance was not voluntary, but part of a larger criminal operation. Her story became a disturbing reminder of how easily someone can disappear in the digital age, how a young woman can vanish in weeks, unseen, despite a nationwide effort to bring her back into the light. By 2022, the federal investigation into Corinna Slusar's disappearance had concluded. After years of gathering evidence, prosecutors filed charges against Ishi Wani, who was convicted of human trafficking and exploiting multiple women. At least 6 young women were confirmed as victims of his crimes. Although Corinna was not the central focus of the prosecution, her disappearance remained unexplained. Substantial circumstantial evidence suggested Ishi's likely involvement. The U.S. District Court for the Southern District of New York sentenced him to 10 years in federal prison without parole and ordered him to pay restitution to several victims. This sentencing was notable, as it represented one of the few cases in which a trafficker received a lengthy prison term despite the absence of a body or direct physical evidence in a major episode of the case. Attention also turned again to Giovanni Peguero. His arrest on August 25, 2017, was the only recorded legal action taken against him. He was never formally charged in connection with Corinna's disappearance. Despite his key role in bringing her to New York, a pivotal moment in her story, he was not named as a suspect in the federal case. Corinna's name surfaced in court not as a witness or defendant, but as a symbol of a young woman lost in the gray area between the internet, the streets, and a justice system that moved too slowly. Her case prompted changes in how law enforcement investigates digital exploitation and the targeting of vulnerable women. Yet, for her mother, no verdict could bring closure. Corinna's body was never found, and her disappearance remains unsolved. In the early hours of New Year's Day 2018, 2 young lovers stepped out of a nightclub in La Paz, Bolivia, but they never come home. 19 days later, on January 19, 2018, police and rescue teams stood on the banks of the Orcoja Huira River. That morning, divers and forensic specialists began hauling strange, heavy bundles from the riverbed. When the sack was cut open, the scene was horrific. Inside were two bodies decomposed serious. Days spent trapped in water and darkness had ravaged them. Identification by sight alone was impossible. After initial examination, a chilling common detail emerged. Both victims had suffered severe traumatic brain injuries. The damage indicated they were struck with a blunt object wielded with tremendous force. This was not an accidental fall. The victims were murdered deliberately and brutally, then thrown into the river like construction debris to erase traces of the crime. The victims were later identified as Carla Bellot and Jesus Cañizares. Both were born in 1992. Their lives ran along similar lines from an early age. In 2003, both families suffered the same tragedy. Each lost their father. After the loss, Carla's mother moved her 5 younger children from Santa Cruz de la Sierra to La Paz, trying to rebuild. As the eldest, Carla took responsibility. She helped raise her siblings, monitored homework, curfews, behavior. She enrolled in accounting and completed her certification through accelerated classes so she could start working sooner, contribute to the household finances. The story in the Cañizares family is almost identical. Jesus grew up with 3 older sisters, but as the only son, he became the principal support for his mother, who was a seamstress. He didn't just keep order in the house, he helped with her tailoring work, taking sewing jobs when necessary. At family weddings, he escorted his sisters down the aisle, standing in the place where their father once would have been. At the time of his disappearance, Jesus was completing his economics degree and finishing the final work on his thesis. Carla and Jesus met at a college party in 2008. Their relationship developed gradually through long talks and walks home together. Eventually, their friendship turned into a romance. Carla kept their relationship a secret for a while, finally introducing Jesus as her boyfriend at her graduation party. They were what many would call a homely couple. They weren't drawn to loud parties or nightlife. They preferred family gatherings, small trips, quiet weekends. They had a clear plan. As soon as Jesus completed his thesis defense, they'd get married and start their life together in their own place. The timeline for January 1, 2018 has been reconstructed through digital breadcrumbs. Carla and Jesus had never planned on ringing in the new year with an all-night celebration. They only agreed to go to the Planta Baja Club after being persuaded by friends. Around 4 a.m., Carla posted a photo on Facebook. The two looked happy, smiling, relaxed, enjoying the concert, the festive atmosphere. About an hour later, their activities shifted from social media to private chats. They messaged family members, saying they would leave the club at 6 a.m. and should be home around 7 a.m. At the same time, Jesus sent a series of messages to his sisters and to Carla's brother-in-law. These were not typical New Year greetings. He wrote that he loved them and promised to take care of Carla. The wording was strange, almost like a farewell. It unsettled the recipients, but there was still no reason to panic. That day was Carla's nephew's birthday. Both she and Jesus were expected at a family lunch. After 7 a.m., their phones still rang, but no one answered. Anxiety rose as the hours passed. They were punctual, reliable, and deeply family-oriented. It is very unusual for them to miss an event without notice. In the early afternoon, Jesus's mother drove to Carla's house. When she arrived, the house was empty and quiet, which made her feel afraid. Something was wrong, because neither family could find Jesus or Carla or figure out what happened. They went to the police. The focus of both the investigation and the public quickly zeroed in on the Planta Baja nightclub, where Carla and Jesus were last seen. The first days quickly turned into a battle. The club's owners refused to cooperate. They would not hand over security footage. They would not allow the families inside. They demanded a court order. Furious and desperate, relatives staged protests outside the entrance, but the doors stayed shut. It wasn't until January 4th that investigators finally gained access. What they found inside raised every possible red flag. The club was operating without a valid license. Security cameras were installed, but none of them were recording. They were props, meant to deter, not document. That meant that the most critical hours of the disappearance were lost forever. The owner's statements then shifted. First, he told police he personally escorted Carla and Jesus outside. Under pressure, he suddenly changed his version, saying it had been a security guard who walked them out. The inconsistency only deepened suspicion. Samples were taken at the club. Hope soared when investigators found blood on the floor. Media outlets speculated that this was the break everyone was waiting for. However, DNA testing destroyed the theory. The blood didn't belong to either victim. Days passed in vain. With no evidence inside Planta Baja, the investigation pivoted. Detectives turned to phone data. Both victims' phones had remained active after they vanished, and the signals were tracked. That digital trail led investigators into a black market of stolen devices. The first major development came from Jesus's phone. Police traced the chain further and reached a taxi driver and his brother. Both admitted they had bought the phone cheaply from someone on the street. Then, on January 17, detectives made a breakthrough. A deep analysis of Jesus's phone geolocation history led them to Israel Leon, a man who had also been at the club that night. Through him, police uncovered a wider circle: Israel's siblings, Elliot and Michaela LF, as well as their partners, Renzo C. and Estefany. What emerged was chilling. According to case files, Carla and Jesus's original group had left the venue much earlier, but Carla and Jesus did not leave with them. Instead, they stayed behind and mingled with a new group, the Leon brothers, whom they had just met at the club. They continued drinking until the club finally closed its doors around 9 in the morning. In broad daylight, the entire group stepped outside. This 4-hour window, from 5 o'clock a.m. to 9 o'clock a.m., dramatically reframed the case. Carla and Jesus were no longer surrounded by familiar faces. They had spent nearly half the night with strangers, fueled by alcohol and a false sense of camaraderie. A nearby business security camera captured the last known footage of them alive: Carla, Jesus, and 3 men, Israel, Elliot, and Renzo C., talking to a taxi driver on the sidewalk. 2 women, Michaela LF and Estefany, were also with them. Eventually, the entire group climbed into cars, planning to continue partying at Israel's house. On the way, they stopped at a roadside stall to buy more alcohol. When they finally arrived at Israel's house, the exhaustion from a sleepless night, combined with heavy drinking, began to take hold. Carla, completely drained, fell asleep almost as soon as she walked in. Israel, the host, passed out in another room. That left 4 people awake in the kitchen: Jesus, Elliot, Renzo, and Estefany. They continued drinking. But with every passing minute, the atmosphere shifted, the party energy died. The room grew tense. Something was brewing. Something dark. Around 11 o'clock a.m., everything changed. Elliot suddenly began berating Jesus, accusing him of pouring drinks the wrong way. What began as mocking turned into sharp insults. As Jesus sobered up, he realized something was wrong. Both his and Carla's phones were missing. He confronted the group, demanding the devices back. Frustrated, he reached toward Elliot's pockets to check for himself. That single moment of physical contact exploded into violence. Elliot punched him. One blow became many. The loud fight woke Israel. Instead of stopping him, he also rushed at Jesus. Renzo followed. The 3 men took turns beating Jesus. The 2 young women, Michaela and Estefany were present when the violence began, but according to court documents, they did nothing to intervene. Jesus, dazed, wounded, barely conscious, was dragged into another room. Carla, still sleeping and heavily intoxicated, was defenseless. When she awoke, terrified and confused, the three attackers turned their rage on her. What happened in that room was brutal. Afterwards, they moved her to the same room where Jesus lay unconscious. The violence continued. The tragic climax came when Jesus regained consciousness. He saw what was being done to Carla and tried to intervene. That act of protection cost him his life. One of the men grabbed a heavy metal pipe and struck Jesus on the head. The blow was fatal. He died almost instantly. With Jesus dead, the attackers turned the heavy metal pipe on Carla. The same pipe was used to take her life. When the final blow landed, the house fell eerily silent. The murderers didn't flee. They stayed in the house for almost 2 whole days, eating, sleeping, and talking, while the bodies decomposed nearby. Only when the streets quieted at night on January 3rd did they act. In the darkness, they wrapped the bodies in coarse jute sacks. The sacks hid the shape, absorbed fluids, and were easier to carry. Instead of using a car, they carried the bodies on foot to the Orcojahuira River, the closest place to dispose of them. They threw the bodies into the river, hoping the current, mud, and passage of time would destroy all traces of the crime. Once investigators had narrowed down the prime suspects, they still needed one crucial piece of evidence: Elliot Leon. Described by witnesses as the most violent attacker and the ringleader, had fled. Right away, an international alert was issued. Intelligence reports indicated he was hiding in Sao Paulo, Brazil. A romantic partner who assisted his escape was later investigated for harboring a fugitive. The next phase of the case would unfold beyond Bolivia's borders. The search came to an end on January 26, 2018. When Brazilian authorities finally located and arrested Elliot Leon, he was detained in Sao Paulo and extradited to Bolivia, where investigators were already waiting. During interrogation, Elliot and Israel admitted to participating in the assault and acts of violence, but they fiercely denied delivering the fatal blows with the metal pipe. Elliot claimed that Israel was the one who struck Jesus and Carla, while Israel insisted the opposite, accusing Elliot of being the killer. They understood that whoever had wielded the metal pipe could face the harshest punishment. But for the prosecution, the distinction was irrelevant. The case was defined as a joint criminal act, a coordinated group assault. No role existed in isolation. When the bodies were taken to the morgue, forensic pathologists encountered contradictions that briefly disrupted the investigation. Autopsies confirmed the cause of death. Both victims had suffered massive traumatic brain injuries with significant internal bleeding. Carla's body also showed multiple injuries consistent with violence inflicted while she was still alive. The controversy emerged from the estimated time of death. Early medical reports gave conflicting dates. Jesus was listed as having died on January 4th, while Carla's report suggested she might have lived until January 11th. This raised a terrifying theory that the victims had been held captive for over a week, possibly tortured, while their families were still begging authorities to find them. The possibility shattered the parents. They endured a new wave of grief, tormented by the idea that their children might have been saved. Eventually, the theory was completely dismissed. Forensic specialists explained that the bodies had been sealed inside thick jute sacks and submerged in river water, creating an abnormal microenvironment that altered decomposition. Once the medical data was matched with witness statements and confessions, authorities confirmed the truth. Carla and Jesus died in the early morning of January 1st, only a few hours after leaving the Planta Baja Club. There was no extended captivity. The trial lasted more than 20 months. The 5 main defendants in the case were Elliot Leon, Israel Leon, Michaela LF Leon, Renzo C. Caceres and Estefany Guizada. Prosecutors presented overwhelming evidence proving their participation in the violent acts. In the end, the court delivered the maximum possible punishment under Bolivian law: 30 years in prison without parole for each of them, on charges of femicide, homicide, aggravated assault, and complicity. At a farewell mass, the parents held a symbolic wedding for Carla and Jesus. The young couple had planned to marry after graduation. Now, surrounded by flowers and mourners, their families granted them that wish. They were posthumously declared husband and wife. The perpetrators had taken everything from them except their love. That symbolic wedding was a powerful act of resistance. The families refused to let the story end in horror. Instead, they created another ending, one filled with dignity, tenderness. Ana Sablina, the familiar voice of radio host Vologda, was once a symbol of confidence and success. But after the sudden death of the man she'd been with for over 10 years, her world fell silent, revealing a void unseen by anyone. It was in this solitude that another man entered her life. He was gentle, caring, and appeared at Anna's weakest moment. But behind that facade of concern lay instability, jealousy, and rages she didn't recognize. On the night of January 2nd, 2023, in a brightly lit Moscow apartment, that gentleness vanished in minutes. When the police broke down the door, they were confronted with a horrifying scene. Anna lay motionless with hundreds of stab wounds, and beside her was the man she had once trusted, drunk, covered in blood, and unable to explain what had just happened. What really happened in that locked room, and why were the warning signs ignored until it was too late? The story of Ana Sablina is not just a case. It's a chilling reminder of how tragedy can silently grow in the very moments we believe we are loved. Ana Sablina was born in 1988 in Vologda, Russia, into a family of educators. Her father, a doctor of history, worked at a university dedicated to regional studies, while her mother was also active in the education sector. Their home was marked by order, discipline, and high expectations for their children. From a young age, Anna stood out for her confidence on stage. She sang, acted in school productions, and frequently hosted school events. Her friends recognized her ability to captivate audiences, and this talent paved the way for her career in media. Unlike many of her peers, Anna always knew what she wanted: a career in radio. In 2006, she entered Vologda State University to study journalism. During her first year, she landed an internship at Russian Radio Vologda, where her distinct voice drew immediate attention. The station soon invited her to host live shows while continuing her studies. Around that time, she adopted her on-air pseudonym, Azovskaya, a catchy name that listeners quickly recognized. By 2011, upon graduating, Anna had become a well-known voice throughout Vologda. Many people listened to her daily, in their cars, in their offices, or at home. Her rapid rise was the result of both talent and determination. Anna's career was stable, but her life changed after she met Vasily Solovyov in 2009. He was a successful businessman from Cherepovets, running several companies, including the radio station where Anna worked. He was nearly 20 years older than her, known for his calm demeanor and high work efficiency. Their relationship began professionally but soon developed into something more personal. Vasily admired Anna's ambition and actively supported her career. He gifted her a car, arranged housing for her in Moscow on Polina Osipenko Street, and helped her find accommodation in Cherepovets and Vologda. These gifts clearly demonstrated his desire for a long-term future with her. Despite their age difference, their relationship remained strong. They kept their romance private, only sharing it with a few close friends. Friends described it as a balanced relationship, not the typical story of a wealthy man and a young woman in the media industry. Anna remained independent and continued advancing her career, never relying solely on Vasily's financial support. Their partnership lasted for over a decade. By the early 2022s, they began to think about a shared future. But in 2021, everything changed suddenly. Vasily fell seriously ill, had to be put on a ventilator, and passed away in June of that same year at the age of 51. Vasily's death was a huge shock to Anna. She became withdrawn, stopping sharing her future plans. Colleagues noticed that the confidence and energy that once defined her seemed to fade. This marked the beginning of a decline in her emotional well-being, which would later profoundly affect her life. After Vasily's death, Anna continued to work, but only what was necessary. Work no longer brought her joy, only daily responsibilities. She gradually withdrew from social life, avoiding meeting and talking with friends. Colleagues noticed she rarely smiled and evaded questions about her personal life. For Anna, this period of loneliness and instability made her increasingly vulnerable to such influences. Throughout 2022, her situation did not improve. She maintained a composed image at work, but privately she struggled with exhaustion and a lingering sense of loss. The stability she once found through Vasily was gone, replaced by routine and solitude. Her world had become small and quiet. During this fragile time, she longed for support but couldn't express it. Emotional emptiness often opens the door to new relationships that feel like a reprieve, a chance to regain balance. This unresolved grief and persistent isolation became the setting for a new connection that would soon shape the next chapter of her life. By late 2022, someone new entered Anna's life, a man who, at first, seemed completely unconnected to her. Vladimir Maklakov, 33, was a local and the son of one of Vasily's old acquaintances. His family owned a large logging company. Although Vladimir was officially its CEO, everyone knew his father managed the real business operations. Locals described Vladimir as someone who did whatever he wanted without worrying about the consequences. His habits were the opposite of Anna's orderly lifestyle. He was known to drink heavily, sometimes acted aggressively, and had a reputation for volatile relationships. Longtime acquaintances said that he had been through many tumultuous relationships, often argued with others, and was also suspected of using substances. Some people affirm that Vladimir's first marriage fell apart after only a few months, and his later relationship ended when the woman left him, taking their son with her. These behaviors indicated impulsiveness, a lack of self-control, and an unstable lifestyle. Meanwhile, Anna was organized, calm, and devoted to her work. A complete contrast to him. Ironically, it was this difference that allowed Vladimir to win her trust quickly. He overwhelmed her with attention, compliments, gifts, and promises of support. For someone still grieving a deep personal loss, that kind of reassurance must have felt like a lifeline. At the time, Anna was emotionally fragile, which made her more susceptible to his influence. Still, she kept the relationship private, whether it was out of discretion or awareness that others might disapprove. She never spoke openly about it. But this was the beginning of a romance that would later turn tragic, because they kept things hidden. Warning signs remained unnoticed until everything escalated. After several months, Vladimir's troubling behavior became obvious. Under the influence, he turned loud and unpredictable, lashing out over trivial matters. Those who knew him said such outbursts were typical of him. Anna rarely discussed these issues directly, but a close friend later remembered small hints. Anna seemed constantly exhausted, avoided details about her relationship, and often changed the subject. These behaviors indicated their relationship was no longer stable. All of this described a man who was unstable and difficult to predict. So why didn't Anna see the warning signs? Their relationship followed a familiar pattern, a phase of caring, promises, then arguments and outbursts of emotion. This was followed by apologies, promises to change, and overflowing displays of affection to make amends. This cycle left Anna both insecure and hopeful that things would get better. In her vulnerable moments, any act of kindness from Vladimir provided Anna with a sense of security. That's why she keeps staying by his side, a moody man, yet one who occasionally shows the tenderness she needs. Gradually, this dynamic shaped their relationship, while the warning signs became increasingly obscured. By the end of December 2022, Anna and Vladimir had gone through many tense periods, but they still decided to celebrate the new year together. For Anna, this was likely a chance to start fresh, to find peace as 2023 began. They traveled to Moscow and stayed in the apartment on Polina Osipenko Street, the same one Vasily had once given to Anna. Vladimir later told investigators that they had rented the apartment, which wasn't true. Perhaps he wanted to downplay his place in the relationship. From late December until January 2nd, there were no visible signs of conflict. They took walks, went to cafes, and even took photos together. On January 2nd, they had a professional photo session. The photographer recalled that the couple looked relaxed and comfortable, showing no tension. In those pictures, they appeared like any other couple, enjoying the holidays, cheerful, calm, and unaware of what was about to happen. That day turned out to be Anna's last. After the photo shoot, they returned to the apartment for a quiet evening. Everything seemed normal. A peaceful holiday night in Moscow. Dinner, conversation, and rest. But in the hours that followed, that calm would unravel, revealing something much darker beneath the surface. What could have been a new beginning instead became the prelude to tragedy. The evening began peacefully, with small talk and future plans. After that, the topic of their conversation shifted to their future, a subject that both of them had been thinking about for a long time. For Vladimir, it was time to assert his position. He unexpectedly proposed, without any prior preparation or discussion. He saw it as a way to solidify the relationship, to assert control. But Anna didn't share his view. She calmly refused, explaining that she wasn't ready to commit to a lifetime with someone who behaved erratically. There was no shouting, no argument, no emotional outburst, and that quiet, composed refusal became the turning point. Perhaps Vladimir understood that calmness as indifference, the very thing he feared most. He viewed the rejection as an insult, even a betrayal. That night, he had been drinking, further destabilizing his emotions and making him more prone to losing control. The conversation quickly became tense. His voice grew louder, his attitude aggressive, and then it erupted into violence. When Anna tried to leave, Vladimir blocked her way. She ran into the bathroom, the only place she could close the door to hide. But the door was weak, the lock unable to withstand the pressure. Just seconds later, the door was broken down. That moment marked the beginning of 3 horrific minutes that forensic experts later meticulously recreated. The autopsy report showed Anna was stabbed 247 times, a number that speaks volumes, reflecting a complete breakdown of control and frenzy. The report emphasized that there were no pauses, a clear sign of extreme emotional disturbance at the time of the attack. It's important to note how quickly everything unfolded. The timeline laid out by the forensic team underscores just how rapidly the situation deteriorated. During those moments, neighbors began hearing noises. First, dull thuds, then sharp cries that soon turned into muffled sounds of a struggle. Several residents called emergency services around the same time, reporting signs of violence. However, records later showed that the rescue team responded slower than the standard response time for this type of situation. That delay became a major focus of the investigation. When officers finally arrived, the apartment door was locked, forcing them to break in. Inside, they found Vladimir lying near Anna's body. He was drunk, his clothes stained with blood, but he offered no resistance when apprehended. His speech rambling and incoherent, his first words were included in the official report. He said he hadn't meant for things to go that far. His behavior was erratic, alternating between confused explanations and total detachment. At that point, investigators had the basic outline of the case, the scene, the weapon, and the suspect found on site. Still, key questions remained about how the incident unfolded, how long it took for help to arrive, and how much alcohol had influenced Vladimir's actions. These details would become central to reconstructing what happened that night and shaping the investigation's direction. News of Anna's death spread quickly in the cities where her voice was well known, and in Moscow. Her colleagues in radio were shocked, describing her as dedicated and professional, qualities that made her death all the more tragic. National media began reiterating the pressures Anna faced after Vasily Solovyov's death, and the mental anguish she experienced. Many theories were put forward, from personal conflicts to issues of inheritance from Vasily, but all remained speculation. Lacking concrete evidence, the trial began with a confession. Vladimir admitted to the attack but tried to present it as the result of an emotional breakdown, hoping for leniency. He was charged with 2 counts causing serious injury, resulting in death and unlawful entry with violence. During the trial, Vladimir's demeanor was markedly different from the night of the crime. He appeared calm, expressed remorse, and claimed he acted under extreme emotional distress. His lawyer emphasized his voluntary confession and the fact that he never tried to flee, arguing this should reduce his sentence. The defense also presented a letter of confirmation from his hometown and previous records of alcohol addiction treatment, aiming to portray him as someone who had tried to change but failed in a moment of weakness. The entire strategy was geared towards depicting the incident as a moment of loss of control, rather than a premeditated crime. After considering the nature of the incident, the timing, and the forensic findings, the court sentenced Vladimir Maklakov to 14 years in a high-security facility. For Anna's family, the verdict brought mixed feelings. The punishment was significant, yet it still felt insufficient compared to the magnitude of their loss. Anna's parents filed a civil suit seeking 5 million rubles in damages. Their goal was not financial gain but formal acknowledgement of responsibility. Meanwhile, Vladimir's attempts to portray himself as a victim of circumstances were seen as an evasion of responsibility. The court's decision officially closed the case, but many questions remained about the choices, warning signs, and missed opportunities that led to a tragedy that might have been prevented. After his conviction, Vladimir's future seemed sealed. He would face many years in prison under strict conditions with little hope of pardon. Yet soon after, his lawyer submitted a petition for him to join a military deployment under a special operations contract, a legal option that allows inmates to replace most of their sentence with military service. The petition was approved, and Vladimir joined a group chosen for accelerated training before deployment. His participation in this program later became grounds for early release. By 2025, just 2 years later, he was back home. News of his release shocked many in Vologda. Residents vividly remembered the details of the crime and did not expect someone guilty of such a serious offense to be freed so quickly. For many, this was surprising, especially for those who believed that justice meant the full execution of the sentence. Upon his return, Vladimir moved near his family. According to people who knew him, he helped his father with daily tasks and deliberately stayed away from public places where he might be recognized. Before long, rumors spread that he was seeing someone new, igniting renewed public discussion. The contrast between Vladimir's quiet new life and the grief still felt by Anna's family was striking. There are no public records of his employment, and open sources do not reveal whether he plans to continue his military service or move elsewhere. What is clear is that he maintains a low profile and avoids any public involvement in matters related to his case. Legally, He faces no special restrictions other than periodically registering at his official place of residence. For Anna's mother, however, his release was devastating. She could not comprehend how the man responsible for her daughter's death was now free. The gap between the court's sentence and the time actually served stirred strong public concern. Many questioned whether the system truly reflects society's expectations for justice in such serious cases. Thus, the story reached its final chapter, one where the legal verdict became only part of a larger, more painful discussion about fairness, justice, and the lasting weight of consequences. That morning, everything in the quiet Florida suburb was as normal as any other day. No one expected the doorbell to ring, shattering the peace. When the door opened, a clown appeared, garishly made up, dressed in colorful clothes, holding flowers and balloons. At first glance, everyone thought it was just a prank, but then, a gunshot rang out. No one reacted or spoke a word. The woman fell, and the clown calmly walked away as if he'd rehearsed it. Flowers scattered, balloons floated in the air, and blood stained the floor. This case is haunting because of its brutality and the terrifying control exerted by the perpetrator. It was clearly a meticulously planned crime, leaving the police baffled for years. The most agonizing question is, who truly was behind the disguise, the one who had orchestrated everything so perfectly? On the morning of May 26, 1990, the Warren home in Wellington, Florida, was awake and ordinary. The doorbell rang shortly after 11 o'clock a.m. Outside stood a clown, full makeup, bright costume. In one hand, a bouquet of flowers. In the other, balloons are floating just high enough to be seen from the street. The confirmed fact is stark and uncontested. When Marlene Warren opened the door, she was shot in the face. The gunman fired once, then turned away. Marlene collapsed inside her home. She would die from her injuries 2 days later. The clown walked back to a waiting car and drove off. The atmosphere left behind was not immediate chaos. It was disbelief. A child was present, close enough to see the clown, close enough for the image to lodge permanently in memory. Witnesses would later describe how the attacker did not run, did not shout, did not hesitate. The calm exit mattered. It suggested rehearsal, control, intention. Police arrived at a scene that resisted logic. Flowers on the floor, balloons drifting against the ceiling, blood where a welcome should have been. The disguise was not random. According to investigators, it served multiple purposes: concealment, misdirection, and delay. For a few critical seconds, no one understood what was happening. Those seconds were enough. Investigators began reconstructing the moment backward. Who expected Marlene to answer the door? Who knew her schedule? Who believed a clown would be ignored rather than questioned? The crime did not look spontaneous. It looked staged, down to the costume and the timing. And as the shock settled into procedure, one question pressed harder than the others. If this was planned so carefully, who was the performance really meant for? When violence enters a home, investigators almost always begin with the people closest to the victim. In Marlene Warren's case, that circle was small and immediately defined. She was a wife, a mother, living a structured suburban life in Wellington. There were no signs of forced entry. The door had been opened willingly. That fact alone narrowed the field. According to the investigation file, Marlene was married to Michael Warren. He was not home at the time of the shooting, but his absence did not remove him from scrutiny. Statistically and procedurally, spouses are examined first, not as an accusation, but as a rule of probability. Detectives reviewed his movements, his business dealings, and the dynamics of the marriage as they were understood in 1990. The atmosphere around the family quickly became strained. Grief was present, but so was pressure. Neighbors talked, rumors surfaced. The clown disguise had already distorted public perception, and now suspicion followed a familiar path inward. Investigators explored whether Marlene had conflicts, fears, or recent disputes that could explain a targeted attack. According to publicly available records, there was no evidence she expected danger that morning. What unsettled detectives was not what they found, but what they didn't. No clear threats, no documented stalker, no obvious enemy outside the household. Yet someone had gone to deliberate lengths to approach her front door without resistance. That suggested familiarity, not necessarily personal closeness, but knowledge of routine. As police worked through interviews and early leads, the case settled into an uncomfortable stillness. Everyone closest to Marlene was accounted for, but nothing fully explained the performance at the doorstep. If the answer was within the nearest circle, it was not revealing itself easily, and that raised a deeper question. If those closest could not be immediately tied to the crime, who else had reason and patience to wait behind a painted smile? The investigation moved outward, away from the front door and into the street. What witnesses remembered next became the first fragile thread investigators could pull. According to statements given that day, the clown did not flee on foot. The figure walked calmly to a parked car, got in, and drove away. No screeching tires, no panic, just departure. The fact that mattered was the vehicle. Witnesses described a white Chrysler LeBaron leaving the neighborhood shortly after the shooting. In 1990, before doorbell cameras and license plate readers, such details were both crucial and dangerously incomplete. A car description could anchor an investigation or quietly send it drifting. The atmosphere around this lead was tense but uncertain. Memory under shock is unreliable, and investigators knew it. Still, the consistency across accounts gave the description weight. Police canvassed the area, tracing similar vehicles, checking registrations, asking neighbors what they had seen, what they might have missed. Each answer brought movement, but no arrival. What complicated matters was timing. The car was gone within moments. No plate number was confirmed. Traffic cameras were scarce. The disguise had delayed recognition just long enough to protect the escape. Investigators were left with a silhouette of a crime, its edges already fading. As days passed, the case expanded geographically. Tips came in from outside Wellington. Sightings were reported, then quietly dismissed. The white car became a symbol of absence, proof that the killer had planned not just the approach, but the exit. Whoever wore the costume had thought beyond the doorbell, and that raised a sharper investigative question. If the escape was this controlled, how long had the person behind the wheel been preparing to disappear? As months turned into years, the Warren case slipped into a familiar category. Unsolved, but not forgotten. The leads thinned. Witness memories softened. The white car was never conclusively traced to a suspect. The clown, once vivid in the public imagination, became a symbol of how easily a case can freeze in place. The confirmed fact is that the investigation was never fully closed. Evidence was preserved. Items linked to the crime, including the clown costume, the flowers, and materials associated with the getaway, were logged and stored. According to investigators, nothing new could be proven with the technology available in the early 1990 seconds. The case waited, quietly, for science to catch up. The atmosphere during those years was one of suspended time. For Marlene's family, there was no resolution, only repetition anniversaries without answers. Headlines that faded and resurfaced. For detectives, the file became heavy with possibilities and frustration. They believed the killer had left traces. They just couldn't read them yet. Decades later, forensic science changed the ground beneath the case. DNA testing methods grew more sensitive. According to publicly reported court records, evidence from the original investigation was re-examined using modern techniques. What once seemed inert began to speak. Allegedly, genetic material linked to items associated with the clown disguise produced results that were no longer ambiguous. This was not a sudden breakthrough. It was a slow warming. Each test narrowed the margin of doubt. Each result reduced the number of plausible explanations. The case that had resisted resolution for nearly 30 years began to shift, not because of a confession or a witness, but because the evidence had been patient. And that reopened a question investigators had learned never to ask lightly. If the science now pointed towards someone they had suspected before, what had time been hiding in plain sight? By the late 2010s, the Warren case no longer lived only in memory. It lived in databases. According to court records and law enforcement statements, the renewed DNA analysis did not point to a stranger pulled from the dark. It pointed back toward a person investigators had scrutinized from the beginning. A familiar figure, now living under a different name. The verified fact is this. In 2017, authorities arrested Sheila Keene Warren, formerly Sheila Keene, in connection with Marlene Warren's murder. At the time of the crime, she had been an acquaintance within the Warrens' orbit. By the time of her arrest, she had moved across state lines, adopted a new surname through marriage, and built a life far from Wellington. The atmosphere surrounding the arrest was restrained but heavy. There was no dramatic chase, no sudden confession, just the quiet collapse of distance. Time, which had once protected anonymity, now worked in reverse. Investigators alleged that DNA evidence connected Sheila Keene Warren to the clown costume used in the killing. The accusation reframed decades of speculation into a single prosecutorial theory. Prosecutors began assembling a narrative of motive, rooted in personal entanglement. According to the state, the crime was not random, nor symbolic, but directed, planned to remove one person from a complicated relationship dynamic. The disguise, they argued, was not theatrical. It was functional. For the family of Marlene Warren, the name change carried its own weight. A suspect had not vanished. She had adapted, lived, moved forward, while the case stood still. The arrest did not erase the years in between, it only exposed them. And as the legal process advanced, one question began to eclipse the rest. After so much time, could a courtroom still deliver a full accounting of what really happened at the door? By the time the case reached a courtroom, it carried the weight of nearly 3 decades. The fact at its center was unavoidable. Prosecutors were preparing to try a murder committed in 1990 with evidence tested in a different century. According to court records, the state of Florida sought a conviction that could result in life in prison without parole. The atmosphere inside the legal process was tense but cautious. This was not a case built on fresh witnesses or immediate confessions. Memories had aged. Some witnesses were no longer available. Physical evidence had been preserved, but every item would be challenged: its handling, its storage, its interpretation. Defense attorneys focused on time itself as their most powerful argument. Prosecutors laid out their theory carefully. They argued that the clown costume was purchased shortly before the killing, that fibers and DNA allegedly linked Sheila Keene Warren to the disguise, and that motive could be inferred from personal relationships documented at the time. The defense countered with uncertainty, alternative explanations, contamination risks, and coincidence layered over decades. As the trial approached, the risk sharpened on both sides. For the state, an acquittal would close the case forever. For the defendant, a conviction meant dying in prison. In 2023, before a jury could weigh the evidence, the case took an unexpected turn. Sheila Keene Warren entered a plea deal. She pleaded guilty to second-degree murder. The sentence, 12 years in prison with credit for time served, meant she would likely be released within months. The trial ended without testimony, without cross-examination, without the ritual of a verdict. The file closed, but not cleanly, and that left a lingering question in the quiet after the plea. When a case ends without being fully told in court, who decides which truths are officially heard? When sentencing was finalized, the math felt unreal. The confirmed fact was this: Sheila Keene Warren received a 12-year sentence, reduced by credits for time already served while awaiting trial. According to Florida Department of Corrections records, she was released in 2023, less than a year after entering her plea. The prison gates closed behind her, then opened again. The atmosphere surrounding her release was subdued, but unsettled. There were no crowds, no public statements from the defendant. For the Warren family, the moment landed differently. 33 years had passed since Marlene Warren opened her front door and never recovered. The passage of time had reshaped faces, aged memories, and reordered lives. Justice, when it arrived, did not resemble the version once imagined. Legally, the case was over. The plea acknowledged responsibility for Marlene's death, but it avoided a public trial. There was no jury verdict weighing evidence in open court. No final narrative tested line by line. What remained were fragments, facts proven, facts admitted, and facts never fully examined. For the family, time had not been something served. It had been something endured. Birthdays missed, holidays without resolution. A crime scene replayed internally while the world moved on. The sentence closed the legal file, but it could not rewind the years Marlene lost, or the years her loved ones spent waiting. The broader system took note. Cold cases rely on patience, preservation, and evolving science, but they also collide with legal realities. Sentencing frameworks measure punishment forward, not backward. They count years behind bars, not decades without answers. And as the headlines faded again, one final question hovered unresolved. When justice arrives late, does it still arrive whole? The Warren case ends where it began, at a front door that should have been ordinary. The confirmed fact is that Marlene Warren's murder was solved not by a sudden confession or a single witness, but by time, preservation, and forensic patience. Evidence collected in 1990, kept through decades of uncertainty, ultimately formed the backbone of accountability. The atmosphere left behind is not one of closure, but of quiet reckoning. The image of the clown never lost its power, but over time, it became something else. Less spectacle, more warning. The case demonstrated how theatrical violence can distort public attention while hiding something far more common beneath it: familiarity, access, and motive, rooted in personal proximity. For investigators nationwide, the case reinforced a lesson already written into policy, but often tested by budgets and fatigue. Cold cases are not dead cases. They are suspended ones. The Warren file survived because evidence was not discarded, because advances in DNA science were anticipated, and because someone returned to the questions when technology finally allowed clearer answers. For families of victims, the lesson is more fragile. Justice can arrive altered by time. Plea deals may close cases without telling full stories. Sentences may feel disconnected from loss measured in decades. The system resolves files. Families live with echoes. Marlene Warren is remembered not for how she died, but for what her case revealed: that violence can be disguised as celebration, that truth can wait quietly in storage rooms, and that accountability does not always arrive loudly. Sometimes it arrives late, sometimes it arrives incomplete, but it arrives because someone refused to let the door close forever. And even now, long after the clown costume has been sealed away, one unease remains: how many other doorbells rang and rang while the evidence was still waiting to speak? That morning in Northwest Houston started like any other. The street was quiet, the houses looked the same, and there were no sounds of sirens or screams. But behind the closed door of a house on Emma Forrest Street, an unnatural silence had fallen. On March 12, 2025, 32-year-old Kristen Chavez was found dead inside her own home, a place that should have been safe. People quickly realized that she had been murdered. The prime suspect was the person closest to her, her husband. There was no need for a manhunt. He was still at the house when the police arrived. There was blood, a common household object used as a weapon, and 4 dogs were missing, having disappeared sometime before Kristen's death. The mystery was, what happened in those last, quiet hours, as if nothing violent had ever taken place? The story begins with a door in Northwest Houston and a moment that feels too still for mourning. On March 12, 2025, Kristen Chavez, 32, is found dead inside her home on Emma Forrest Street in the Oak Forest area. Pronounced at the scene, her death is quickly treated as a homicide. A single fact anchors the first hours. Police say her husband, Chance Chavez, 34, is arrested and charged with murder. Outside, the neighborhood looks like any other: lawns, driveways, the quiet geometry of ordinary life. Inside, investigators are faced with a kind of violence that doesn't fit the setting. Court reporting later describes an iron split, damage linked by prosecutors to the attack, a domestic object reframed as a weapon. The air around the case turns cold fast, not because the public knows everything, but because they know enough. A woman is dead, the suspect is close, the scene is personal. According to the reporting on what officers encountered, Chance Chavez is at the home when police arrive. Prosecutors would later describe him with blood on his body and clothing, raising his hands as if surrendering. It is an early investigative turning point. Not a long search, not a stranger in the dark, but a case that collapses inward toward the people already inside the frame. And then there is the detail that doesn't belong to the script of a typical call-out. Family members and local reporting say Kristen's dogs, 4 of them, were allegedly taken and abandoned along the Katy Freeway hours before she was found. It lands like a flare over the city, a clue, a distraction, or a signature, something that invites witnesses, tips, and public emotion before investigators have even finished photographing the walls. One fact is clear: early. Kristen is gone, and the investigation begins at home. The feeling is harder to quantify. A closed door can hold an entire storm. The leading question tightens as daylight spreads across Emma Forrest Street. If the evidence points inward so quickly, what was happening in the hours before police arrived? The case is only opening, but already it's moving toward the past, toward the marriage, toward the patterns investigators look for when violence erupts in private. Before the violence becomes public record, Kristen exists in quieter facts. She is 32 years old. She lives in Northwest Houston. She works. She keeps dogs. She has a routine that, until it breaks, appears ordinary. According to family statements and early reporting, nothing in the days immediately before her death suggests she was planning to disappear. There is no packed bag, no goodbye message, no sign she is preparing to leave her life behind. The silence comes abruptly. Friends and relatives later describe Kristen as close to her family, engaged with her everyday world, and anchored by responsibilities that assume a future. The home in Emma Forrest is not described as temporary. It is a place of settling, yet, according to accounts shared after her death, there are hints, small, incomplete, of strain inside the marriage. Nothing formally documented as criminal, nothing that triggers outside intervention. The kind of tension that often remains private until it can no longer. Investigators working backward focus on routine because routine is what collapses first. Phone activity, daily movements, whether she answered messages, whether she showed up where she was expected. According to the investigation file, there is no evidence that Kristen leaves the house alive after a certain point. Her world narrows to the interior of her home, to a timeline measured in hours rather than days. The dogs become part of that backward walk. Family members would later say they believe the dogs were removed from the home before Kristen's death. That detail matters because it suggests forethought, an action taken not in panic, but in preparation. It reframes the hours before the killing as a sequence, not an explosion. Someone is thinking ahead. Someone is making choices. Emotion enters the case through absence. Kristen does not call anyone for help. There is no confirmed emergency call from her phone. No neighbor reports hearing a disturbance loud enough to trigger a police response. The house holds its secret long enough for the night to pass into morning. That quiet weighs heavily in domestic homicide investigations, where violence often unfolds without witnesses and ends before anyone outside knows to listen. Police attention begins to settle on the relationship itself, not because of gossip, but because statistics and case history demand it. Intimate partners are always examined first. Alibis are tested, timelines are tightened, financial and digital records are flagged for later review. At this stage, investigators are not proving guilt. They are establishing context. Who had access? Who had a motive? Who was present when the silence began? One fact remains steady. Kristen does not leave her home alive. The feeling beneath it is unease, the sense that whatever happened was not spontaneous, but building quietly behind closed doors. And the question investigators cannot avoid is simple and heavy. If the warning signs were subtle, what did they add up to in the final hours before her voice went quiet? When investigators step inside the house on Emma Forrest, the scene does not shout. It tells its story slowly. According to court filings and police statements, Kristen was found with fatal injuries consistent with blunt force trauma. The medical examiner will later confirm homicide. The fact is stark. The atmosphere is colder still. This is not a break-in, not a chaotic ransacking. It is a domestic space altered by violence, where everyday objects remain close at hand. Among those objects is an iron. Prosecutors will later identify it as the alleged weapon. Its presence matters because it anchors the crime in the ordinary. No firearm brought from outside. No blade is hidden on a person. Something is already in the house. Something within reach. According to the investigation file, the iron is damaged, split in a way consistent with repeated force. That detail becomes a pivot. It suggests not a single impulsive strike, but sustained violence. Blood evidence reinforces that reading. Investigators document blood on the suspect's body and clothing, and blood at the scene. The distribution is important. It places violence inside the home and ties it to proximity. There is no indication of an attempt to clean the scene before the police arrive. No elaborate staging. The story the house tells is one of immediacy events that moved faster than any plan to conceal them afterward. Yet the crime scene also raises restraint questions. There are no signs of forced entry, no broken doors or windows. That absence narrows the field. It supports a theory that Kristen knew the person who killed her. Someone she allowed close. Someone is already inside. In domestic homicide cases, this pattern is familiar, and investigators treat it carefully, aware of how often familiarity becomes leverage. Time becomes the next variable. When exactly did the assault occur? How long was Kristen alone afterward? According to police, the timeline is reconstructed through phone data, witness statements, and the discovery of her body. There is no confirmed emergency call from her phone, no final message. The silence is total. It suggests the violence was sudden and overwhelming, leaving no space to reach outside the room. One fact crystallizes as evidence is logged and photographed. The crime scene does not point outward. It points inward, toward the relationship and the hours immediately before the killing. The feeling it leaves behind is claustrophobic, the sense of a life ending without escape, inside familiar walls. And the question investigators carry forward is unavoidable. If the house tells the truth, why were steps allegedly taken outside its steps involving the dogs before Kristen was killed? Hours before Kristen is found dead, something happens that does not fit the quiet geometry of the house. According to family members and early reporting cited in the investigation file, 4 of Kristen's dogs were allegedly removed from the home and abandoned along the Katy Freeway. Some are found wandering near traffic, others are recovered later. The fact is unusual enough to pull the case into public view almost immediately. For investigators, the dogs are not a sideshow. They are a timeline marker, living evidence that someone left the house, traveled a distance, and made deliberate choices before returning or not returning. This is not an act that happens during a sudden fight. It requires time, transportation, intention. It introduces the idea of sequencing, suggesting that events unfolded in stages rather than a single moment of loss of control. The image of domesticated animals left in danger resonates far beyond the courtroom. It triggers calls, tips, outrage. But detectives work to strip away emotion and focus on function. Why remove the dogs at all? In domestic homicide investigations, animals often represent obstacles, witnesses that bark, disruptions that draw attention. Their removal can indicate planning, or at least an attempt to create conditions for privacy. The freeway itself matters. The Katy Freeway is busy, visible, and unpredictable. Abandoning animals there risks public discovery. That risk raises questions. Was the goal to permanently get rid of them, or simply to remove them from the house temporarily? Investigators consider whether this act was meant to delay discovery, prevent interference, or serve as a distraction. According to the investigation file, there is no evidence that the dogs were harmed, but their abandonment is treated as an intentional act tied to the larger sequence of events. Witness accounts become critical here. Drivers, passers-by, anyone who may have seen a vehicle stop, doors open, and animals released. This is where a private crime brushes against public space. Surveillance cameras, traffic cameras, cell phone pings. The investigation widens briefly, not to look for a stranger, but to document movement. One fact anchors the theory building: the dogs are allegedly gone before Kristen's death. The feeling surrounding that fact is deeply unsettling, a sense that choices were made in advance of violence. And the question investigators begin to ask grows sharper. If someone took the time to remove the dogs, what does that say about what they believed was coming next? The case tightens as attention turns back toward the person police say was inside the house when they arrived. The next layer is not about animals or highways, but about a suspect standing in the doorway of the crime scene itself. When police arrive at the house on Emma Forest, they do not search the neighborhood. They do not set up roadblocks. According to police statements and court reporting, the suspect is already there. Chance, Kristen's husband, is at the home when officers make contact. The fact is immediate and inescapable. This is not a case that unfolds over miles. It collapses into a single address. Prosecutors later describe what officers observe: blood on Chance's body and clothing, his hands raised. His presence is framed by the doorway of the house where Kristen is dead inside. According to the investigation file, this moment becomes a critical anchor point. It shortens the investigative arc dramatically. Instead of asking who might have entered the home, detectives focus on what happened between the two people who lived there. Arrests in domestic homicide cases are often quiet, procedural, no chase, no dramatic confession, just a tightening of handcuffs and a shift from scene management to case building. Chance is taken into custody and later charged with murder. The legal language is firm, but restrained. Allegations, not conclusions. Evidence, not verdicts. Investigators begin constructing the suspect profile not from rumor, but from proximity and access. He had keys, he had time, he had an opportunity. These are not assumptions, they are logistical facts. Detectives review phone records, financial activity, and movements tied to his name. They examine injuries. They document statements. At this stage, inconsistencies matter more than motives. The goal is not to explain why, but to establish what can be proven. The defense posture has not yet fully emerged, but the outline is familiar. Presence does not equal guilt. Blood can be explained. Silence can be strategic. Investigators know this. That is why physical evidence becomes central. The alleged weapon, the condition of the scene, the absence of forced entry, the dogs on the freeway. Each detail either tightens or loosens the narrative around the suspect. Emotion enters not through courtroom arguments, but through contrast. A husband, a home, a body discovered within shared walls. The feeling is one of compression lives, evidence, and timelines pressing inward toward a single figure without yet delivering a final answer. Public attention intensifies, but the case remains disciplined, bound by what can be introduced under oath. One fact stands above the rest. Chance is the only person police publicly identify and charge. The atmosphere around him is tense, unresolved, and the question that now drives the investigation forward is unavoidable if he is responsible. What pushed the situation from private strain into irreversible violence? That question leads investigators deeper into motive, pressure, and what may have been building beneath the surface long before police crossed the threshold. With the suspect identified and charged, the investigation shifts from proximity to pressure. Why is it always the hardest question? According to prosecutors, motive is not a single moment but an accumulation. Detectives begin examining the space between Kristen and Chance Chavez, where arguments, expectations, and control may have lived long before the night turned violent. Financial records come under scrutiny, bank accounts, spending patterns. Obligations are shared and separate. According to court discussions referenced in public reporting, investigators look for stressors that could sharpen conflict debts, disputes over money, or pressures tied to maintaining a household. Nothing here is dramatic on its own. It rarely is. Motive often hides in mundane details that, over time, gain weight. Control becomes another investigative lens. In domestic homicide cases, violence is often preceded by attempts to manage space, movement, or autonomy. The alleged removal of the dogs returns to the foreground, not as an emotional act, but as a functional one. Prosecutors suggest it may reflect an effort to control the environment, to reduce noise, resistance, or interference. If true, it reframes the act as preparation rather than panic. This is where cases become uncomfortable. The evidence no longer sits on a table, it stretches into daily life. Phone records are examined for tone as much as timing. Messages are read not for romance, but for strain. According to the investigation file, there is no indication of an external affair or third-party intrusion driving events. The focus remains inward. At this stage, the prosecution does not need to prove motive beyond a reasonable doubt. They need coherence, a narrative that aligns actions with outcomes. The iron, the blood, the dogs, the absence of forced entry, the presence of the accused. Each piece does not scream motive, but together they suggest escalation, a situation that crossed a line rather than erupted from nothing. Emotion in this phase is subdued but ominous. Motive building is slow and methodical. It lacks spectacle, but it sharpens the case. For the family of Kristen, this is where grief meets explanation. Though explanation does not equal comfort, understanding why does not undo what happened. One fact remains central. Prosecutors continue to hold Chance as the sole suspect. The feeling surrounding that fact is tightening inevitability, as if the case is drawing breath before the next legal shift. And the question now facing the court is not just what happened, but how firmly the evidence will hold when tested publicly. That test begins not at the crime scene, but in a courtroom where bond, control, and credibility come into sharp focus. The case moves from the house to the courtroom without losing its weight. Chance stands before a judge, no longer framed by a doorway, but by procedure. According to court records and reporting from the bond hearing, prosecutors argue that the evidence against him is strong and the risk he poses is serious. The charge is murder. The facts presented are measured, not theatrical. Blood evidence, presence at the scene, the alleged weapon, the dogs. Each element is introduced not to persuade the public, but to justify restraint. Bond becomes the focal point. It is not about guilt or innocence. It is about control. Prosecutors request a high bond, pointing to the severity of the crime and the circumstances surrounding it. They argue that release could pose a danger, or at a minimum, undermine the integrity of the process. The defense counters with familiar ground, no prior convictions, community ties, the presumption of innocence. This is the legal rhythm of early homicide cases, where both sides are positioning for what comes next. The judge listens, weighs. According to reporting, the bond is set at a level that reflects the gravity of the charge. It is a procedural decision, but it carries symbolic weight. It signals how the court views the strength of the case at this stage, not as a conclusion, but as a threshold crossed. The atmosphere in the courtroom is restrained, almost clinical. There are no outbursts, no dramatic testimony, yet the tension is unmistakable. Kristen is absent, but present in every reference to the victim. Her name is spoken carefully. Her life was reduced, for now, to evidentiary relevance. This is how the system works, even when it feels insufficient. Public reaction simmers outside the courtroom. The detail of the dogs, the domestic setting, the immediacy of the arrest all have already shaped opinion. But inside, the case remains insulated from emotion. Judges do not rule on outrage. They rule on risk, law, and precedent. Control, again, becomes the quiet theme. Who controls the narrative? Who controls movement? Who controls the pace of justice? One fact is now fixed. Chance remains charged with murder as the case moves forward. The feeling is one of suspended gravity, as if everything is held in place, waiting. And the question that lingers is larger than this single hearing. How will this case resolve when evidence is tested fully, and what will remain for those left behind when the legal process ends? That question carries the story beyond verdicts and bond amounts, into the aftermath where justice intersects with memory, and where the consequences of violence continue long after the courtroom empties. After the courtroom quiets, the case does not end. It lingers. Kristen Chavez's name remains attached to filings, hearings, and headlines, but for her family, the aftermath is not procedural. It is permanent. According to public statements and reporting, those closest to her are left navigating two parallel realities: the legal process, unfolding in slow motion, and the absence that never pauses. One fact defines the outcome at this stage. Kristen is dead, and her husband remains charged with her murder. The case has not yet reached final adjudication. There is no verdict carved in stone. Allegations remain allegations until proven in court. But the trajectory is set. Evidence has been logged. Timelines drawn. A suspect has been identified. The system has taken custody of the truth-seeking process. Domestic homicide cases rarely offer a clean closure, even when convictions occur. Answers can arrive without relief. Sentences can be handed down without healing. For Kristen's family, the future is divided into before and after, with no bridge between the two. The house in Emma Forest becomes a symbol not of home, but of rupture. Public attention fades, as it often does. New cases emerge. Headlines shift. But certain details from this one persist in collective memory: the iron-turned weapon, the dogs on the freeway, the speed with which the investigation narrowed inward. These elements are not just facts. They are warnings. They illustrate how violence can coexist with routine, how danger can grow in familiar spaces without drawing notice until it is too late. Social lessons surface quietly. This case reinforces what research and case history have long shown. Domestic violence does not always announce itself. It escalates behind closed doors. It exploits trust, proximity, and silence. When it surfaces, it often does so catastrophically. Prevention depends not only on law enforcement but on awareness, intervention, and the willingness to take early signs seriously. Kristen Chavez is remembered not for how she died, but for the life that was interrupted, plans unfinished, relationships severed, a future removed from its own timeline. The justice system will continue its work, methodically, imperfectly. Whatever its final outcome, it cannot return what was taken. One fact remains unaltered by any ruling. Kristen's absence reshaped lives. The feeling left behind is quiet grief, layered with unease. And the question that endures, long after this case file closes, is one society must keep asking how many warnings go unheard before silence becomes irreversible. This case ends here. The lesson does not.